Thanks everybody for being here for the Crook County Budget Committee meeting on October 23rd, 2025. Today we are gathered to focus on fiscal sustainability for the county and specifically the Sheriff's Office. We'll touch on the core services project that we are undertaking, walk through some forecasts, and talk about some options we have in regard to the general fund and the Sheriff's Office as we begin planning for fiscal year 27 and beyond. So with that introduction, does anybody have any questions or comments before I really dive into it? You want to pull a PowerPoint up?
Public comment?
I believe our agenda has an opportunity for public comment. Is there anybody online or in the room who would like to make public comment before we get started? Hearing and seeing none. Do you think the Budget Committee has one piece of business to take care of before we jump into our discussion in earnest? I believe you have draft minutes from the Budget Committee meetings earlier this year.
Move to approve. Second.
Okay. So am I still the chair or are we doing
Yeah,
the?
you're still, I would say you're still in chair.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is a regular question. It should be on the agenda every time. Any comments about the minutes? Questions? They were extensive and comprehensive and appreciated all of that. So, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Great, thank you.
I don't know why it's not.
Is it not pulling up?
A peaceful scene, though.
Yeah.
For a while.
It's on my computer screen, but it's not pulling up there.
That'd be really nice in January.
There you go.
We're already a half an hour ahead of schedule.
I don't know why it's not doing that.
Cruising.
Is it not? Okay, there we go. Sorry.
Good. It's
Hold on.
showing your screen view, though.
I know, I don't know why it's not. There we go.
You gotta drag it over to the other screen. So drag it to the whole thing,
This?
all of this, everything. Oops,
Yeah,
sorry, I
it's showing
touched it.
numerous screens.
It should be on share screen now. Where did it go?
I know they were moving on Zoom last year, and then they updated everything. That's all over.
I'm supposed to drag it over to the right.
Right here?
Oh, yeah. Looks like that's it.
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah, we can skip to the next slide.
Do we know that it's being filmed and
Yeah, it's recording.
the other people can see it?
Yeah.
All right, so here's the agenda for today. We knocked out the first couple. I'm going to give kind of a quick overview on the core services project that we've begun to undertake. I'm going to discuss some of the economic impacts that Crook County and other counties across the state are facing, just to kind of provide some context. We'll go over the forecast for the general fund and the Sheriff's Office. We'll also, as part of that, we'll look We'll take a look at some analysis that a consultant did for the county. And then we'll kind of dive into some funding options, some ideas that I'd love to get some feedback on as we begin to look forward to fiscal year 27. We'll be focusing on the general fund and the sheriff's office funds as we do that. And then we'll wrap up with any feedback, comments, suggestions, and we plan together for next steps. Any questions on that? Good to go? Everybody ready?
Ready.
All right. We got a next slide again, James. So we are still in the relatively early stages of reviewing core services for the county. I initially asked our departments to provide core service descriptions earlier this calendar year. They, for the most part, promptly did. We have draft core services service descriptions for the departments. We've not had time to do a thorough board review of those core descriptions, except for the sheriff's office, the library, and the health department. We do have a tentative schedule put together that will let us roll through, hopefully, the rest of the departments this fall and early winter, so that we can have that complete by the end of January. The memo I provided includes some further kind of detail in terms of the importance of having these core service descriptions in place and having conversations about them, including having regular conversations about core service descriptions. I just want to highlight a couple of those important benefits of having these core service descriptions. I can't remember if we discussed this in May or not, but during the county's mid-year reviews, we often talk about challenges to core services, but we haven't, since I've been around, had an intentional kind of conversation about what those core service descriptions are. So this is a really important opportunity for us to form that kind of common understanding, not only between department heads, myself and the board, but also to make sure the public understands the critical services we're providing them. Because at the end of the day, it's their tax dollars, and it's important that they understand where those dollars are going to, the services we're providing. Excuse me for 1 second. I guess as far as the core services project goes, I just kind of wanted to note the status, kind of reiterate the importance of the core services project. And if there's any questions about where we're at with that or any feedback you have at this point, I know it's still early in the process, but I think it's really critical that we get through that process to set us up not only for fiscal year 27, but ongoing conversations. One of my goals, once we have that project completed, is to find an avenue to make sure we're having an annual discussion about those core service descriptions, probably at that mid-year review, to make sure there continues to be alignment in terms of, this is what the public expects, this is what the board is expecting in terms of the services we're providing. As we get further into, there's always the prospect of conversations in the future where, we're not in the same financial position we are, at least heading into fiscal year 27. It provides a clean opportunity to have a good understanding about what's discretionary, what's in inventory in terms of the state. So it really helps inform those conversations if we have to get to them about what we have to fund and what we don't have to fund. But bottom line, benefit that I see is just making sure we have complete alignment throughout the organization in terms of the services we're providing to the citizens of Crook County. So with that, if there's nothing more on the core services kind of project at this point, we can move on to the next stage of the show. So included in your packet is just it's a relatively short memo on some of the economic headwinds that not only Crook County is encountering, but other counties across the state. Most counties, or a number of counties, are encountering slowing or kind of level property tax growth. This is in part a result of the state's property tax laws and limits on how much local government can raise to your property tax. Measure 5 and Measure 50 put those caps on what a local government can raise through property tax. And it's capped at, for most properties, it's capped at 3% per year in terms of assessed value increase. So we have that kind of big picture thing that limits the ability just to raise revenue. On top of that, we have inflation pressures continuing. They're getting better, but they are persistent. Personnel costs continue to rise for all counties. And now we're at a point where certain grant funding that we may have relied on in the past is more uncertain than it used to be, because of, in part because of Oregon sanctuary status and federal, the DC's current position on tax issue. It threatens grant funding for local governments in the state of Oregon. But there's a lot going on in DC it's mixing up kind of the grant opportunities that are available. And then I think one of the more relevant kind of, I don't know if threat's the right word to use, I know I put that on the PowerPoint, but growth creates a lot of opportunity, but when it comes to providing service, and when you're faced with increasing costs and limits on how much revenue you can generate, growth stresses the services that Crook County provides its citizens, because we have more people needing or demanding service levels. So that's a threat, I guess, if you want to call it that, across the organization, but it's also very true with the sheriff's office in terms of growing population means more people and the potential for additional call-outs and other issues that they need to respond to. As a result of these economic forces that are outside of most counties' control, a number of counties are taking proactive or reactive steps to addressing some of the pressures they're feeling. And I just want to take a minute to highlight a couple of those. So Wayne County is, one of their issues is flat property taxes. They've had patrol and jail layoffs. They've made jail beds less available. This is more of a reactive response from Wayne County due to the loss of federal funding. Jackson County citing increases in PERS expenses and healthcare, and declining taxes and loss of federal funds, has had some jail closures and parole and probation cuts. Marion County, similarly slow property tax increase or growth, facing inflation issues and uncertain state funds, has instituted hiring freezes, some layoffs, and limited or trimmed public health. This is it's a repeat story, and there's more counties taking these types of steps at this point, and I have listed here, including, I think Deschutes County last year had sort of a hiring freeze. There's counties are reacting to these larger economic forces. But I want to highlight these because I think it provides important context for what we're facing. This isn't a unique Crook County as we get into the forecast and stuff. That some of the numbers we're going to see are I don't want folks to think this is something unique to Crook County. This isn't something Crook County did wrong. These are forces that are impacting jurisdictions across the state. And some of them may have good roadmaps we can follow, but bottom line is most counties are facing these same challenges, making decisions, try to weather that economic storm. Anybody have any questions on?
When I was reading this, I do see, these are all challenges that are out there, but I think there's strengths and opportunities as well. And I didn't see any of that, anywhere in the conversation, but to have virtually a guaranteed minimum 3% increase in your revenue every year, there's a lot of organizations that would kill for that, not complain about that part. And I get it, because everybody has inflation and those things to deal with. I think another positive thing, and I saw some of the challenges, was PERS. We're not in a situation that we're except for some, like the sheriff's department, I think is PERS. I don't know what else, yeah. But for the large part, this county is not under that situation like I believe most of the other counties are with that. And also, while it brings challenges, growth is a good thing. And there are counties that are not growing, they're going the other way, that I could see would really exacerbate that. So I appreciate that things are, budgeting is conservative, but with the growth that we do have and we enjoy in the county, 3% is pretty much guaranteed, and any growth generates additional, correct, over the top of that. With that, and I'm not saying it's rosy, everything's great, but I think there is some great.
Couldn't agree more.
I think the perspective you're bringing reinforces that. I mean, this county, what you've highlighted is that this county is probably on a relative basis in better future situation than many counties in Oregon. And the problems we're facing we're going to have to address, obviously, and there's multiple ones. But as Bill said, it's exacerbated to a greater degree in other counties. And I feel good about our relative less misfortune, I guess.
Well, I agree with you. I agree with you both. And I think there is absolutely opportunity. I do think Crook County, despite some of these larger pressures that we're all feeling right now, I think is, to Steve's point, in a better position than a number of counties for a couple of reasons. And we'll get into some of that when we get into the forecast. But, we do continue to see growth in Crook County. You're absolutely right. It's a positive thing. It does stress service levels at times. But as far as revenue goes, new growth, new development is a good thing. A lot of counties aren't facing that, and in the kind of table I provided, there's some that have flat tax growth or declining. We're not in that situation, so that is absolutely a positive. We also have a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel that a lot of counties don't have. That plays into, down the road as we get more, we'll get into this again, but as we get closer to 2030, 2031, as we become more comfortable with what those forecasts are showing us, what we can anticipate, it allows us to be strategic about that, maybe even a little bit before some of that revenue comes in. So we have a lot to be positive about. We have a lot to be grateful for as we try to solve these problems over the next few years. And I don't want that to get lost in the conversation today, because we will see, some numbers that aren't encouraging, but they're also, there are solutions, there are ways forward, and there is, at the end of the day, that light at the end of the tunnel that will help. So we've got a lot to be thankful for here in Crook County. And that's why trying to solve some of these challenges is more fun than it would be. So,
But we also do hear from a lot of people that don't like the growth and the fast growth. And with that growth does bring problems because we haven't set ourselves up to be able to handle that growth with like SDCs or different type of things that we need in order to keep our infrastructure up. And so that is the aspect of too much growth is bad if we're not planning for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Do counties typically have SDCs? I know cities, that's very typical.
SDCs in counties for infrastructure are pretty common in, I can't speak for like smaller rural counties, but they are pretty common in larger counties. Deschutes County's had an SDC for a long time. And I know other counties I've worked in the past have had SDCs, so I can't speak to how many do versus don't.
But
It's common.
we don't have system development charges.
No, and mostly for roads. I mean, we've lived over the years with our windfalls from the timber industry. That's been gone for a long time. Those funds are depleting on a pretty substantial rate. And the compensation reimbursements from the federal government on their properties with SDCs and rural schools and things are not up to par, and there's talk of them disappearing. And so we've got a plan for that.
And part of that plan, though, needs to be talking to the public and bringing them in and being part of the conversation.
Absolutely.
That's a decision that the citizens need to make, not at least with input from the citizens.
I believe with input from the citizens, certainly. Because the citizens, want and demand services. We have to be able to meet that need somehow.
Just like we've been doing with the core services, show them what we can provide with what we have and what, if we had additional dollars, what we can provide.
Didn't mean to take away from this.
No, I appreciate the conversation. It's good. Good to hear what people are thinking. And since we're talking about SDCs, SDCs are an important tool to start to build up funds for road projects, but it's not a light switch that you can flip and all of a sudden have funds. They may eventually add the match funds if we add SDCs on an ODOT related project, but it's depending on the amount of revenue a jurisdiction can raise by SDCs, they may or may not be terribly helpful, and that's something we have to look into. We did update our TSP just recently, so we're in a position now where we can have TSP is the Transportation System Plan. We are positioned now where if there's support for it, we can move forward with SDCs, where as in the past we weren't necessarily positioned to do that. So that's a conversation we can have regarding the road department at some point, but in terms of funding projects. But we don't need to keep going any further down that road right now. So Brianna, do you mind moving to the next slide? Well, I'm just going to jump into the memo, and these slides I think will flow along with it. But for the general fund analysis, most of this stuff was just pulled from the budget. It builds off the adopted fiscal year 26 budget, assuming approximately 96 actual expenditure of the appropriated budget. Revenue growth is set at 4% in fiscal year 27, followed by 3% annually thereafter, reflecting a conservative posture below long-term historical averages. budget uses Portland State's estimates for population growth and materials and services as reflected in the budget escalate 2027 as departments, as we have currently planned, move back into a renovated courthouse and offices. So those are some of the key assumptions underlying this forecast.
Is, the Portland State forecast, as I've looked at them over the years, they seem to be woefully behind our reality.
Aren't they?
Mr. Crawford,
You want me to rant for 5 or 10 minutes right now?
They're a statewide number. They're just like peanut buttering the whole state. It's not.
What's worse than that? What they do is they set up a system where it helps urban counties and hurts rural counties. Because what it does is, it's more complicated than this, but one of the major metrics they use is that when a city and a county gains a person, then the population of the county decreases outside of the city limits. And so that's great in Portland where you have, or Multnomah County or Clackamas County or Washington County, where you have very few unincorporated areas. But when you look at Crook County, Jefferson County, Deschutes County, there's tons and tons of growth outside of the city limits. And so you're losing each one of those people when you use that equation. And I think it's done specifically because the way they separate gas tax and a lot of the funding throughout the state is by population. And I guess the vehicle registration would really change because that's a specific
Isn't
thing.
Will talking about property tax growth here in the county?
Population growth.
Okay, I was following along on this, where you were talking about property tax growth is forecasted. Oh, population demand, okay.
And so when it comes to funds we receive from the state, a lot of times they do that strictly on population.
Right.
Especially for the city with gas taxes. And then, but I think countywide, health, roads, all these different things get done from these Portland State numbers, which is a very questionable. I mean, Will and I sat on the phone with them one day for an hour and we were coming up with some very good points. You know, we've got Brasada, we've got Juniper Canyon, we've got Palo Verde Estates. We have all these areas that are outside the county that are growing, but we're getting zero population numbers, which equals dollars from the state because of that.
Yeah, I don't know this for a fact, but that conversation we had, it was a few years ago, but the takeaway was, despite what we know about our destination resorts in terms of residents, like, yeah, there's a lot of people who have second homes in Brasada Ranch and elsewhere in Crook County, but we have a high residency rate. I think it's over 50% last time I checked out Brasada. But they're getting no credit, not credit, but they're not accounting for that population increase. And what Seth was saying previously about if they see a person move to the city, they assume that rural population went down. Like that's based, I'm assuming that's based on a planning concept where, they want to encourage folks to live in the city and pull them out of rural areas. And it does ultimately in a number of different ways benefits the urban areas, not the rural areas. Why population growth is important for budget forecasting is it reflects potential increases in service demand. So there's an argument, if we're using Portland State's numbers, that we're not correctly accounting for that potential increase to service. So it's Portland State's numbers are the common metric, and in certain cases legally required.
Yeah.
It played into our TSP, right? Our update to our TSP. We had no choice but to assume this lower growth model, even though we know we're going to see increased growth. So we don't necessarily have a lot of flexibility there, but it's something we need to keep in mind, that those numbers aren't necessarily reflecting the demand on service we're going to see from the actual population growth. Crook County remains one of the fastest growing counties in the state. And those increases, have a noticeable impact on service levels across the organization.
And just to wrap it up, you can look at lots of different metrics throughout the state, like voter registration or school, amount of kids in schools, and different things. It would be a much more specific type line to what that population is. And so there's got to be a reason they're not used, just like the gas tax, that they use population of vehicle registration, not gallons sold in the county.
So, as the memo described, it was showing up on the screen, the general fund stays relatively stable through fiscal year 27. We're still in that 42% range, so it's about 5 months worth of operating, or 5 months of operating expenses. But it does show a decline in that ending fund balance in 2028. Down to by 2030, only 4%, so $1.4 million. So that is a decline that we need to address and take some proactive steps beginning as we plan for fiscal year 27 and going forward to try and make sure we continue to have an appropriate contingency in place and that we can continue to provide those services out of the general fund.
How many months do peer counties have of contingency? You talk obviously in the stuff you sent out about us being conservative at 5 months, but, and that the rules, the law says minimum 2, but I mean, obviously you've looked at comps. I mean, I'm kind of cutting to the chase in the head a little bit, obviously, as one of the levers that you're talking about, but I'm just curious. You didn't describe what peer counties are doing.
I can't speak to peer counties. I don't know, Christina, if you can speak to peer counties. Christina, I have talked about GFOA's newer recommendations in terms of contingency and reserve requirements, but are you familiar with what any of our peer counties?
Deschutes counties are similar to ours now. They're both the only ones I really know that are defined.
So that's just a quick kind of overview. The memo includes some additional detail on the general fund forecast, but any questions on the general fund? Any more questions on the general fund? All right, moving to the next slide. This first slide, again, this forecast has a couple different forecasts. I kind of touch on the consultant's forecast. This one up on the screen, this is from our fiscal year 26 budget. This forecast builds from the adopted fiscal year 26 budget and assumes continued spending at 96% of appropriated funds, property tax allocation at 57.7%, which remains the primary revenue source for the sheriff's office. The forecast assumes staffing, current staffing levels, which is budgeted at 61.7 FTE, assumes those staffing levels throughout this kind of forecast period. I will just take a moment to note that the 61.7 is what we budgeted in fiscal year 26, but that was after a pretty significant reduction in FTEs from the prior fiscal year. So they've come down, and then they are currently slightly lower than 61. They have about 57 FTE currently. But these assumptions, this forecast is based on a flat FTE number throughout that 5-year period.
So maybe I missed something. So the revenue forecast or, the revenue goes down significantly in fiscal year 27 and stays down until about 2030. Does the 57.7% of property taxes change?
The drop in fiscal year 27 is the result of that noticeable difference between this fiscal year and next fiscal year is some one-time transfers that were not assumed to continue forward. So there was a general fund transfer, there was a loan from capital reserve, and some other one-time funding that bolstered it this fiscal year.
And do these numbers in this chart reflect, last year we allowed for any overage over the 4% to go to them. I think that ended up being like $240,000 or something like that.
Yeah.
Off the top of my head. But I mean,
This forecast hasn't built that.
it hasn't built that in at all.
I will note,
And it doesn't appear to have in the 2026 adopted reflected those numbers either.
well, that's because we just recently realized what that number, that could vary
Okay,
significantly.
And I thought so, I just assumed so, I just wanted to make sure I understood that as versus the numbers we're looking at.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'll touch on it. We did get some additional revenue to the tune of $270,000, so that will be reflected in the future. But
Not that it makes the chart go a lot rosier.
hey, it all helps, right? It's more than an FTE right there, so it's important. Just for the sake of kind of explaining that full revenue picture, so for fiscal year, over 7.2 million came from property tax revenue, one from pilot payments, significant state support for community corrections, that's a grant funded division within the sheriff's office, some federal PILT money, and then again, those one-time funds, so the LATCF spend down and then transfers from the general fund and capital asset reserve.
And we're going to be assuming in future years that the federal grants, the state grants are not going to exist basically for budgeting purposes.
For community corrections, I think we can assume that there's going to be some reductions from the state on that. I think we're already at a point, quite frankly, and Stephanie, you might be able to elaborate a little bit on this, but we're already at a point where federal grants are kind of off the table for the sheriff's office. Right. Stephanie was telling me just recently about a grant she couldn't even apply for because of certain representations we'd have to make on the grant application form. This grant would have supported body cams to the tune of over $400,000 over the course of 3 years. So that sort of, those lost opportunities are real. The federal grant, the availability of federal grants is certainly going to impact us going forward. The state has its own financial and other issues that it's dealing with. So those state supported programs like community corrections are at risk, and we've seen it in other jurisdictions where they've already had to make reductions to parole and probation. So. And another thing that's not reflected, because this is pulled from the adopted budget, but I understand from Christina, our finance director, that the beginning fund balance for this fiscal year will actually look a little bit better than what we have in here due to primarily vacancies in the sheriff's office. Those numbers haven't been finalized, so I didn't include them, but bottom line, there's a contingency of around $4 million. at the end of this fiscal year, but the fund balance is projected to fall below policy minimums quickly next fiscal year. Actually, we'll end up, we're already below, even at $4 million, we're below that 5 months of operating contingency. So while the contingency looks healthy at the end of this fiscal year, we're not where we should try to be under our current kind of fiscal policies. The 5-year, obviously, as you can see on the screen, doesn't look better. So, between fiscal year 28 and 30, expenditure growth continues to go up due to personnel and insurance costs. And this is forecasted to outpace 3 to 4% property tax growth. And the forecast as reflected in the budget shows us reaching negative territory by fiscal year 28.
Is there regulatory or legal ramifications to being under the minimum net working capital? I mean, if minimum really was absolute, we're already below it, right? There. So what's the consequence of being in that situation?
I don't know that there's an immediate consequence to being below our fiscal policy regarding that. Christina, I might lean on you for answering that
Sure.
question.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's no regulatory minimum technically for a minimum fund balance. However, in our fiscal policies, we had set those fund balances up. The requirement of our fiscal policy is if you go below it, you have to have a plan to get back to it. So there's not necessarily a consequence, but you do have to put a plan together for any department that falls below it to get back within that metric. So kind of answered your question. The main reason for those is to cover the funding gaps from the time we receive property taxes. So that can be a consequence. It's very real, where if this fund does not receive the revenue or have the reserves and their cash goes to zero, they will have to borrow from another fund to get them through until tax dollars come in for the next tax year.
Thank you.
So, bottom line, this forecast is reflected in the budget, reflects the need to find some new recurring revenue and or reduce expenses. And we need to move with some urgency in doing so, as noted previously in 28, we should reflect the negative balance. So that's one of the reasons we're here today, start to talk about that. So this forecast was based off of what we have in this year's budget. Earlier this year, the county did retain an outside consultant to come in and do some property tax analysis and take a deeper dive into the sheriff's office fund. And in the memo, I touch on that. I mean, the bottom line is even with some different assumptions, especially in terms of property tax growth or revenue, they still show the next 5 years requiring some pretty significant adjustments due to revenue or expenditure control. They looked at a couple different models. They looked at a baseline and a high growth model using 5.51 to 6.34 annual property tax growth. But they still are showing operating gaps that would draw down fund balance by 28 to 29, requiring additional revenue. So they're more optimistic property tax revenue assumptions still show us going into the negative as early as 28, 29. So one of the what I'm trying to say, the consultant did take a dive into how certain property tax revenue from the data centers will impact us. So as data centers, as their payment in lieu programs expire, they roll onto the tax roll. And the consultant does discuss this a little bit. The first data center comes off the tax roll in 2028. That money is currently dedicated to debt service. There may be, we don't know exactly what that number is going to be. We're pretty confident that it's going to be enough to cover debt service. The question is what extra might be there. And I included in the memo kind of a breakdown of what the consultant is projecting at this point in terms of future data center revenue. I think what's important for the immediate conversation, which I'm kind of framing as fiscal year 27 through fiscal year 30, is that there's that first data center I mentioned, and then there's another data center that comes on in 29, 30. So those two data centers may kind of play some role in this kind of planning period in terms of potential revenue, but it's not significant initially, and there's still a lot of uncertainty in terms of what those dollars are going to look like. The table I provided reflects that kind of wide variance. The other thing that, as we, in the future, as we take deeper dives into that potential tax revenue post 2030, is the volatility that will surround those data centers because of the personal property aspect and the replacement schedules that the data centers have for their servers. So I think this data center information is interesting, and I wanted to include it because I do think as we move forward in future years, as we get more certain about what this really means for Crook County, I think it can certainly frame some strategic conversations about those later years in this decade. But there's no golden nugget out there that's going to solve it for fiscal year 27, 28, or 29. So we need to, work through our options, which I think is what I want to talk about next. But I did want to give you guys an opportunity. There's more information, obviously, in the memos about the forecast, about the work that the sheriff's or the consultant did for the county. Were there any questions about those forecasts before we move on?
Is the volatility that you referred to based on the choices that the data centers have about how they handle their personal property?
Yeah, some of it, if I understand you correctly, don't feel afraid to tell me I misunderstood your question, but the data centers will have some control over how they, it's a business decision for them in terms of when they replace servers and make those decisions.
Depreciation and all that.
Exactly.
Okay, but about half of the value, would it be accurate to say is like the buildings and all those that are those hard assets that are there? So that's not part of any volatility, I presume.
That'll be, certainly less volatile. Should be stable.
Yeah.
The real property.
Cool. And they haven't given any clues about how they're going to be handling those business decisions?
I believe there's been some indication that they're gonna be on a shorter time period in terms of kind of replacement schedule. But
Which lends itself to lower early tax payment.
Yeah, that's a pretty good incentive, right?
yeah, sure.
As we all do. We all have incentives to minimize our tax bill.
It's legally fine.
Granted, you can skip into the next slide.
The majority of all that tax work also is done by general assessment from the state, it's not on the local.
Next.
This is all covered, yeah, in the memo, and I touched on most of this. Yeah, I just wanted to, this just kind of highlights, you know, for future conversations in terms of tax revenue, you see a steady increase in property tax revenue starting in 27. Again, that initial kind of bump from the data centers is dedicated to debt service, kind of steady increase for the next 8 or so years until you get to 2023 or 2033, 34, 35. I can't quite see from this angle, I think it's 35. That's when the last data center, the payment in lieu expires and they come on the tax roll. It's a big bump there because that is a big tax. So again, just kind of highlighting where we are. You know, we're entering fiscal 27. You know, with strong reserves at this point, but revenues expected to decline. We're going to continue to face rising cost pressures. We are, you know, forecasting slower revenue growth. That's just a conservative approach. So that's factored into some of these forecasts. But as we've seen, both with the general fund and with the sheriff's office fund, those mid-years, starting in, you know, towards the end of 27 and going through 30, show a need for us to find additional revenue or find a way to minimize our expenses. So there's a memo I provided. I think you guys got it this morning. Apologize for the late delivery of all of the information, but there's a memo regarding options for general fund stabilization. We're going to walk through some of these options at this time and what I'm, you know, there may be some off the wall options, there may be some good options. I'm looking for feedback. The goal is to, at the end of today, kind of have an idea of what folks are comfortable with in terms of some guidelines we should set for the fiscal year 27 planning process. Get some direction on some options that you guys might think we should dive deeper into and explore. So with that, we'll just kind of roll through these options. So this is hiring pauses are a common tool used, whether it's a local government or business when forecasts start to look a little shaky. A hiring pause kind of helps put a little bit of a cap on personnel costs. By limiting new hires, we can, in replacing positions as they kind of leave, we can limit that personnel cost without having to do furloughs, without having to do layoffs. You know, just a rough estimate on my part was if we had a hiring pause for fiscal year 27 and that led to around 3 positions not being filled, that would save the county $250,000 during fiscal year 27. I think it's if we want to go this route, I think a hiring pause, you should build in some sort of policy that allows for exceptions for essential positions. There's all, you know, if there's a core service that we can't provide because we don't have a position, I think we need to be willing to look at that and fill that position. But I also think there's real opportunity at the county right now based on investments we've made in recent years, be it with the ERP, be it with our new HRIS system. You know, AI is is an opportunity to create efficiencies throughout the organization. So I think there's an opportunity to continue to provide our current service level without filling every position as it becomes open. So it certainly, in certain cases, can put some additional pressure on staff in terms of workload. We'd have to kind of keep track of that, make sure we're not overburdening staff, but it is an opportunity to kind of relatively easily limit some of our personnel costs.
Does this include replacement employees? If someone leaves that is performing a role within the county, you're not going to replace that individual, or is this truly a new hire? Is this an additional FTE on the head count?
I would lean towards having it cover replacing employees. And that's why I think we need a policy with an exception process so that we can address essential functions, ensure that core services are continuing to be provided. But if there's an opportunity to lean into some of the investments we've made technology-wise and continue to provide those services, I think we need to take a hard look before we replace that position, whether somebody's leaving for retirement or moving on to another job. But I think we want a transparent policy on how those decisions are going to be made. And might lead to some tough conversations, but good conversations about workload and how we can continue to provide service throughout the county and find efficiencies.
So on this theme, we went through this at my prior employer a few times during budget constraint times. And what we did to scale in lieu of replacing employees was use contract labor. Because a lot of the workload that needed to be accomplished could be done in months and didn't require an FTE on an annual basis. So we were able to realize some pretty significant cost savings by leveraging contract labor to come in to perform these roles. So just note.
That's great.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah. I do want to clarify, I think I pointed this out in the memo, maybe a bit more clearly, but as we're working through this first batch of options, these are options that are intended to address the general fund, future deficit. So these are some of these policies, if we're talking about a hiring pause, wouldn't necessarily apply county-wide. It would be those general fund related departments. As an example, community development needs to be able to scale up, scale down based on permit activity. Wouldn't necessarily be subject to the same policy. Not a general fund supported department.
Their revenue also increases when they have to get that, so offsets it.
In your position, Will, do you have the authority to implement that kind of thing without there being a budget policy or that type of thing? I mean, like you say, by the way, things are tight, guys, so, we have a freeze on hiring.
Yeah.
Right.
I think I probably do have that authority, but, I like to be transparent with the board in terms of these decisions. Commissioner Crawford's been here a long time. He's been through some of these conversations in the past. Commissioner Barney and Commissioner Herlick both have, really valuable insights. So if a decision is made, it would be a public conversation at some point in terms of this is the direction we're going. I want feedback, but I think part of my responsibility is ensuring we're putting stuff like this in place, despite what I think should be conversations we should be having and informing the public about. This is, just sticking with, sorry, Brianna.
Sorry.
Just sticking on the hiring pause option for one more minute. You know, there's the potential if that drags on for a long period of time, there could be some morale issues. And kind of related to that is this isn't some structural change that ensures cost savings year after year. It would be something we'd want to implement on somewhat of a temporary basis because we do want to ensure we're well positioned to recruit, retain people, and this can start to weigh on an organization after a long period of time. So it's a short-term fix, but it does help us set us up into a better position in those mid-years, 28, 29. All right, next option. Materials and services cap. So again, just some kind of basic math there, but if we cap materials and service at 2%, I think we average around 3.5% for budgeting purposes. Potential savings there of $75,000 a year. It would help limit fund transfers to closer to fiscal year 26 levels. It's predictable, recurring cost control. Helps to protect and preserve the fund balance. Supports still some moderate operational flexibility as some of those materials and services goes up, but ensures we're also taking a hard look at them year to year to make sure we can keep within that 2% range. And related, it upholds fiscal discipline. It may, though, impact some forecasted activities. May lead to some deferred maintenance, loss of service contracts, etc. Lead to some departmental constraints. So it's not all, there's pros and cons to all of these options. And I think it's important we consider them as we start to think forward to fiscal year 27. Any thoughts on that option?
You're gonna end up having to do a little bit of all of this. I mean, that's
The reality.
we can run through them, but that's where you're gonna be. Or at least many of them. I don't know about it.
You're probably right. Option 3, a cap on certain general fund transfers. So, there's transfers out of the general fund to the health department, to veterans. The main one I think this would impact probably the most would be the health department. Our budget discusses, a transfer from the general fund at 15% of fund expenditures. So that transfer as expenditures go up year to year increases. So this would potentially impact the health department. It would impact other departments as well if they needed additional general fund transfers. But this is a relatively modest attempt to preserve general fund assets and doesn't really move the needle significantly, but it does ensure predictable general fund obligations. We know year to year it's going to be this. So if there was a big bump in expenditures for the health department, we wouldn't be caught off guard. Encourages departmental self-sufficiency, and we'd be transparent about what we're doing.
I think you might be on the wrong slide.
Yeah, your options are mixed.
This is about your health insurance.
Your memo is correct, but your slide's wrong.
I might not have a slide for that one. So we can. What's that?
I don't think you do.
I don't remember seeing that as I went through. So it's described in the memo. We've discussed it.
That's option 4, really.
Yeah, they're backwards. Yeah.
Oh,
Oh, no,
Yeah.
no, hold back, go back to option 3, yeah. So,
Option 4.
yeah, so your memo's gonna refer to option 4.
Just to make sure that we're paying attention, isn't it?
Yeah.
He's talking about the right one.
yeah, I don't think there's a slide for that one.
Oh, can show you.
Apologies for the confusion. So next option, option 4 in the memo, option 3 on the PowerPoint, is to look at the health insurance contribution all employees make at the county. So currently, the county covers 90%. Employees contribute 10%. The shift to 80/20 would, it looks like, save us around $600,000 a year. Obviously, the downside is you're asking your employees to cover that expense. Any adjustment initially would just be applicable to non-represented employees. It wouldn't apply to represented employees.
Can you describe in more detail what requires labor negotiation in this particular case means?
We'd have to sit down with the unions and
There's a union contract now, so yeah, so that would, that's what I assume.
With peer counties or competitive counties, it seems like this would further exacerbate competitiveness and the.
It would, and I think I noted that in the memo that there could be a competitive disadvantage. I believe Deschutes County has a flat fee they charge around 100. I think
It's not much.
It's not much. I think it just went over $100 recently. It was 95, I believe, for a little while. So it would put us at a potentially at a competitive disadvantage with them. I think Jefferson County is in a similar position to Deschutes County.
Has the county considered alternative? I get that everything has to be in unison with the union, but about different levels of self-insuring. I know that Deschutes County has its own health situation and arguably has saved many hundreds of thousands of dollars and continues to do that. I don't know what, the leap is to get to something like that or participate. But there's also different versions of insurance that you buy, and
Yeah.
I'm way beyond my own knowledge. I'm just, you said off the wall is okay, but.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is something I have. It's pretty far down on the to-do list, but it's something I want to look at. I'm aware of what Deschutes County does. Jackson County has a pretty successful program as well, and it saved them a lot of money. And at some point, I would love to dig into what both those counties did. I don't think there's a lot of counties that have taken that leap, and I know their programs vary, but I'd like
There are a number of private employers that have done that. Once you get to a critical mass, then you can make those numbers.
That's what, I mean, Jackson and Deschutes obviously are a lot bigger demographic than Crook, so I was wondering what that critical mass where it becomes.
Right.
Could be.
I have a friend that set up Deschutes County for that, and so if you wanted to talk to him,
Yeah.
I'd be happy to.
I think you've offered that before, and I need to find some time. I'd like to get a general feel for, where that critical mass is, when it makes sense for an organization to make that adjustment. But again, it's pretty far down on the to-do list, but it's something I would really like to find time to look into.
Yeah, it has potential to avoid the pressure or maybe mitigate some of that pressure that has to go on employees. But it doesn't come without some risk too.
I haven't we done it with our, insurance, like our fleet insurance,
Yeah.
not our cars, but
Casualty, or
casualty for buildings? And it's been super successful. I think we've saved 300,000, 400,000 over the last couple of years.
I don't remember the quantity, but we have saved money by having a higher deductible.
Yeah.
And we've been running through that whole process, and each year we change it if we're trying to stay in a window where it's best suits the county.
Typically, you off the risk by selling your reinsurance to another firm. I'm sure the Sheets is probably doing that. Where they self-insure, but then they.
Yeah.
There's a second
Reinsure.
liability. Yeah, exactly. So, anyway.
I know that's how some private employers do it as well.
Okay.
Yeah, so since we're kind of diving down here, can I just get some clarity, Will, that the 10% premium that the employee pays of $251, my rudimentary math tells me that that's $2,500 a month for a health insurance premium for a single coverage?
But that's family coverage.
It says single.
That's a single unit.
That's what's in multi.
Makes it pretty high.
So, I think the memo might have the typo there. It is the average county-wide for all plans. That's not for an employee only coverage. So right now, the premiums are about $2,500, growing to about $3,000 if you are on the full family coverage. And we have, the majority of our employees are on family coverage. There is an assortment across employee and only their children, and employee and only their spouse. So we have the whole mix. That's just a blended.
Yeah, that's definitely a family, not
Okay.
a single member, for sure.
Yeah, so I was seeing an opportunity there if that was a single to negotiate a better price for insurance claims, right?
I'll sell you a better plan.
So that's not, that $251 isn't socialized then per individual. It is their actual 10% of their premium.
On average.
On average.
But this is an average. It's not socialized that all employees are paying $251, right? All employees are paying $251.
That's what I'm
No,
saying.
it's based on.
Depends on what your
Choose.
premium
It is based on their enrollment.
So the family total is 3,000 something?
Full
For
family.
a $1,500 deductible plan, yes.
Yes, depending on, there's 3 different plans. Employees can pick whichever one they want, and then they just pay the 10% of whatever the cost of that plan is.
So just to echo the private insurance comment that you made about employers, there's a pretty large employer around here that pays a family premium, right? Their monthly cost per employee is $1,070. And it's backed by Blue Cross Blue Shield. So it's not a private card, right? It is resold. And the employee pays $219 a month for that coverage. So if you're able to drop from $2,500 down to even $1,500, your budget savings on $5.3 million is significant. So I mean, as you're talking about your priorities, and this is maybe a ladder priority, this has potentially the biggest cost savings of anything we've talked about. And not increasing the cost to the employees, but potentially reducing it.
I think if we look at health insurance premiums, which is accelerated in terms of each year growing up, and they're going to continue to accelerate. You might be treading water to get a better deal, but I agree with you that this sounds like a relative. I do a lot of employee health, non-health employee benefit stuff in my business, but I see health stuff for large employers all the time. And this seems like a more expensive than, I mean, I'm looking at 20,000 employee type plans and 100 employee plans. And this seems more expensive than pure robust coverage.
It's really good coverage.
Well, I'm sure it's really good
It
coverage.
is. But we're paying for it.
And you want to have really good coverage. I mean, health is crucial to employment, but I think that the companies I'm talking about are among the largest in Oregon that I work with on non-health things, but I see those plans, and they're really good plans
Are they?
in the Silicon Forest and Nike and things too that I see, so. Anyway, I don't know. I know this is down your list and you've got a lot of things on your plate.
Based on some of the options you guys have been describing, I think it's worth spending some more time on it, making it more of a priority.
You know, when you multiply a high six, low seven figure dollar amount by the next 3 or 4 crucial years, you get into a pretty big number like Scott was suggesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it would maybe potentially not even require renegotiating a union contract.
Yeah. And if we can find a way to minimize the impact on employees, that would be a huge one.
Do you want to set up a call?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, even without self-insurance is an option, but I am not obviously privy nor know what your annual contract negotiations look like with healthcare concerns that are making bids to you guys, but even with non-self-insured, I've seen in pure numbers, with robust coverage, better value.
We did go back to market this year, and the plan that we're on was the best option we got. There was 4 other carriers that bid for us. Some of them unfortunately no longer have contract with St. Charles on their underlying
Yeah, that's another
carriers.
problem too.
So that is part of one of the things we're running into is.
St. Charles is having problems dealing with anybody.
Yeah, there's very.
You are stuck with St. Charles, that's true. And,
Yeah.
Obviously, in the metro areas, you're not stuck with St. Charles, but.
We kind of have a central Oregon monopoly.
Yeah, that probably is good for them.
Not definitely worth making a call.
Yeah, we can
Maybe there's a
explore
hybrid model or like we're doing with the other.
a couple different options, yeah.
Yeah.
Might be winners.
I mean,
Worth looking into. Appreciate that feedback. That's great.
Could we take a quick break for a minute, or in a couple minutes?
You can use the chair.
Servant leadership.
I can use one.
Yeah, just a few. I just didn't want to interrupt if you're.
Yeah, no, we're between, so
Oh, good.
all right, we got one last option as it relates to the general funds. This is kind of a reserve policy option. So this is more of a strategy than any sort of actual cost saver or revenue generator. But it is an opportunity for us to take advantage, so that Christina mentioned earlier, if you're below that reserve policy threshold, you have to have a plan to replenish it. One of the benefits would be we could spend down some of that reserve without having to have a firm plan in place. We want to make sure, well, let me back up. So as we discussed earlier, general fund, we like to have 5 months of operating expenditures in there. As I understand it, GFOA now is, I don't know how long they've recommended this, but now recommending 2 months worth of operating expenditures. So we're being conservative in that regard, which isn't a bad thing at all. But we do have an opportunity to maybe liberalize our policy just a little bit. And if we do it later in this kind of planning period, 28 through 30, when we have a better feel for kind of post-COVID cash flow, and we also have a firmer kind of understanding of what future property tax revenue looks like, so that we can be more confident in exactly where we are. I think there's an opportunity to, lessen the need, I guess, for additional revenue in those later years if we make this kind of strategic adjustment to a lower reserve policy I talked in my memo about 2 months, I think. If this is something we want to discuss, we want to discuss what that reserve amount should be. 2 months is like the minimum, right? So, if we're feeling good as we get closer to that time period, I think there's an opportunity to adjust that maybe to 3 months, whatever we're comfortable with, so that we can move forward, stay in fiscal compliance. Yeah, any questions on that?
If I read this correctly, this doesn't take effect until fiscal year 28. Is that the proposal?
That's my recommendation if we want to go this route.
Okay.
I think if we wait a year or two to do it, we can, we'll have a better understanding of kind of cash flow trends, kind of post-COVID. We'll also have, hopefully each year we'll get more and more comfortable in terms of what the data center revenue will actually look like. So I think we'll be in a position to make an informed decision at that time. It's an option. It's a strategic kind of move, and it frees up a little bit of cash. It doesn't, like I said earlier, it doesn't generate cash. Cash doesn't save money, but it allows us to adopt a fiscal policy that we can comply with and use those freed up funds to support us in the latter years of this planning period as we move closer to the early 2030s, when we can anticipate some increased revenue.
And then one of the items you listed in the columns, Joe, was further tax appeals. Are there tax appeals that are affecting income right now?
I thought there was one significant tax appeal.
There's the thing about when you do the property,
It's an example where on page 8.
when you
What's that?
It's an
take
example
that
where
property and you sell it.
The significant one I think you're talking about, Bill, is with the city power.
Oh, yes, there is that.
Has that been resolved?
it's under reduced risk.
It's not that I'm aware of.
Bill, that one has not been resolved yet. However, a Delta case just got settled that the Pacific Power case was filed under the heels of. However, Pacific Court did just file a new case on October 10th that is not related to the same case they already have. So our assessor is working on assessing, determining the impact on the county that one will have. That one is also an appeal on the property value of our electrical equipment and things in our county. And their appeal is less than half of the value that's currently assessed. So.
So if you go to page 8 of that memo, under cons, it's reduced risk buffer, and you have AG for their tax appeals. I think it's just an example, is what you're referring to.
Yeah, yes, thank you.
Another option out there too would be like when we have property to sell.
Yeah.
There's issues with that throughout the state where they're deciding whether we can sell it at a profit.
I don't think we can.
We can't.
Supreme Court
So
came
as
down
of
with us, yeah.
September 26th of this year, we're required to market foreclosed properties. We have a year, we have to put them on the market. If they don't sell within that year, then we have to take additional steps. Any funds that property sells for over and above what the costs and taxes owed on that property are to be turned over to the state, Department of State Lands, and the owner of the property that was foreclosed on is entitled to the rest of those funds.
Department of State Lands will slap in the face.
Well, and it's
So-
my
spend it really well.
understanding that if that person doesn't claim it, it's unclaimed property.
It is correct.
Eventually it goes back to the state, right?
I believe it just sits there until it's claimed.
Well, but there's a sunset on it.
Yeah, if it remains unclaimed forever, then the state will.
Yeah, I mean, eventually, I don't know what the sunset is, but there is.
Yeah, I don't know.
Right, it's until
The state's just taking it out of our hands,
Yeah.
any opportunity for income.
Yeah.
Yes,
The good news is that's not a liability risk for us because we turn the money over.
Yeah.
no,
Bad news is the state has it.
Yeah.
and we'll never get it back.
Yeah, so, yeah. Um, But yeah, the further tax appeals, that would be like the potential refund credit, as Christina explained it earlier. There's always that outstanding risk, and it does help create, having a larger reserve would help buffer in case we have to start to refund certain tax payments.
So, with the reserve amounts, What would the arguments be for any specific, I mean, we came to a 5-month standard or whatever there. Why 5 months? Why not 2 months or I mean, it's a savings account, but it's very general.
Yeah. I think, I mean, I think what is prudent from organization to organization is going to vary, right? So if you have uncertain revenue, uncontrolled costs, you want to have as large a reserve as possible. If you are certain about future revenue and you're comfortable with what your cash flow is, then I think you could justify a lower reserve amount.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this is why would recommend that if we want to explore this, we push it out a year or two. I think we'll be in a better position to assess that. I think, you know, given just the general economic uncertainty that we discussed earlier, trying to keep that reserve number up for a year or two is prudent because we don't know exactly what the future holds. But I think as we get more information that we anticipate getting over the next couple of years, we'll be in a better position to make a sound decision based on solid reasoning for why that should or should not be adjusted.
But there isn't a particular formula that, I have seen formulas that say, well, this much we'll put in reserves for this, to cover this kind of risk, because that's what you're really covering. And then this much for this, and then the chances of this thing happening. And then you kind of you work your way to a number. And, you know, it's like accounting, you know, you just decide what you want your assumptions to be with that.
Yeah.
But I think I would tend to agree with you in the sense that this is the county's savings account. This is, and if we are facing a situation from 28 to 30, that this could be the proper use for the savings that have been accumulated by the county, especially if there's a good potential with more experience of replenishing that savings account. But to just have a savings account because you want to have it out there and never use it, this may be the right time to help mitigate the difficulties right now.
Bill, I can add a little bit of color to your question. The 5 months is kind of the average period of time that we don't receive cash flow in funds like the sheriff's office. For example, we have parole and probation split out. They have a 3-month reserve requirement because they receive quarterly grant payments. So it's based more on the timing of the cash flows of that fund and what makes sense to make sure we have cash to cover those needs.
So do our actual cash balances then decrease during that period to what level?
They do pretty dramatically. Unfortunately, historically, we don't have great data with the one-time funds that we've had to kind of artificially change those. That's why in a few years, we'll have a little more data of what a normal year looks like. The other aspect is the way the county's accounting changed. In 21 to 22, they consolidated a ton of accounts and moved a bunch of things around. We don't really have a good way to pull that data to use it in cash flow forecasting to have a high level of certainty that it's correct for where it's what, because so many things come.
So that would be important to know what the real minimum is, because we wouldn't want to literally run out of cash.
Correct,
Yeah.
and that's some of the analysis that we're excited to do.
So when you're talking about that portion of the general fund allocated to the sheriff's department, you're talking about that portion, that percentage, the 57.4% allocate of the reserve allocated to them, not the full reserve.
No, so the general fund is completely separate from the sheriff's fund.
Okay.
So
It is.
they're separate, completely separate from each other. The sheriff's office just receives the 57.7% of property tax revenue and some other tax sources that goes into that fund, but they're not connected to the general fund. And other than the one general fund transfer that was done this year, they don't receive general fund support.
So I'm still want to understand, I'm still a little confused about the difference between what we're talking about here. versus pulling it down from there?
I guess I don't understand your question.
I don't know either. Yeah, we're talking in this auction about pulling down, from 5 months to 2 months, the overall fund,
So
the countywide.
we don't have a county-wide reserve requirement, it's by fund. So the general fund requires 5 months of general fund operating expenditures.
And separately,
And they're completely separate, they have a separate requirement. And we pull pro and probation out of their requirement because they're the only piece of the sheriff's office fund that is grant funded. And we get that funding quarterly.
Okay.
Whereas the rest of it's property tax funded, and we have a much larger time period where we don't have cash flow to cover those expenditures for the rest of the sheriff's office.
I was smooshing them all together. In my brain.
As an example, just to throw in another number, community development has an 18-month requirement because we had done a tail study that said of the permits people have paid for, prepaid for, and the amount of work that still must be paid out on them, a reserve of 18 months ensures that we have enough money to continue to pay for the services we've promised to do. So the fiscal policy looks at each fund and each operation on an operation by operation basis. Landfill also has a requirement, they have that post-closure piece that's required, Christine, I'm not on a limb here, but DEQ requires it, or,
Yes.
yeah. And so like our policy says this amount stays, plus these other things for operations or whatever. It's definitely a case by case.
Okay, thank you.
So it seems like it makes sense to let the accountants have fun figuring out what.
Christina did sound excited about it.
It's exciting to do.
Yeah.
But Christina go wild.
But I think this is a strategy that can be employed with a number of our funds that we haven't taken a super recent look at their reserve policy. Jamie brought up the community development fund policy. That was done more recently. There's sound reasoning behind why that is what it is. But for some of the other funds, we might just want to make sure our policies continue to make sense, find the right time to make that strategic adjustment if it's to do so.
So, I mean, right now, we're talking about the difficulty of the economy and all of that, and this is arguably really great times. So what it really is, like with county revenues and things, how were they impacted back in the 07, 08, when the last time, a serious recession came on? Values came way down, but generally the counties continued to come up because of that, the good side, I guess, of the Measure 5, because there's such a big gap between what the taxable value is. So I guess my question is, when a serious recession comes again, how will that impact our
Well,
revenues?
we still have a pretty significant gap between assessed value and fair market value. Or what you'd be able to sell it for. So we have room to, that 3% is going to be there for the county. The challenge when the real estate market in particular is hit hard is collecting. So our
Right.
collections go down.
That's where the real risk.
The potential revenue is still there because we have that gap between.
Yeah, it'd be collections and volumes of things like with landfill, all that, then those volumes could go down.
Yeah.
As well.
And property tax revenue, assuming we continue to, tax what we can tax, that you can project that to be steady, right, 3%. Certain departments like community development would be harder hit. So it varies from fund to fund and department to department to a certain extent. But for the general fund, the potential revenue is not likely to change rapidly. You do see it, what I saw in my previous career, kind of post 2010, is people started to realize, wait a second, my property is not worth as much as the assessed value. Then you start to see an increase in property tax appeals. And then you start to reset that assessed value. So long market downturn, would potentially impact revenue at some point. But for the first few years, we have room to continue to increase.
My only concern being if we went down to much smaller reserves, effectively, and then have a, prolonged recession, I guess that turns into a depression. Over time, say you went on for 3 or 5 years, not 18 months or something, that we wouldn't want to be really hitting the bottom there and literally running out of cash.
So I think you're spot on, and I think that's why this needs to be thought out. Not only do we need good information, but we also need to have sound reasoning for why we are comfortable with it, and have a plan in place to help us out if we do hit that. Again, this is more of a strategy for us to employ if we want to down the road. Just kind of provides context for the whole of this kind of planning period. It is an opportunity we have to discuss further. All right, so that's it. That's it for the general fund. Now we move to the sheriff's office fund. Okay, we've talked about this rising cost, outpacing revenue, persistent service demand growth, in part due to population growth, and increased personnel costs. So what I thought we might do, just to kind of help provide some context, is I put it in the memo as a preliminary option, what can we afford option. I did some quick math. I'm not gonna say that my math is as accurate as what we could have pulled out of the finance department, because they're much more skilled with this, but I think it gives us an idea, right, of where we are. So I tried to calculate what can we afford based on projected revenues in fiscal year 27. And I assumed in doing this that to go along with this, what would have to be a reduction in FTE, the sheriff's office would also reduce their materials and services by a certain percentage and also reduce their capital outlay by a certain percentage. And I came up with the number 8.3 million available for personnel costs. We currently have budgeted, I believe, 10.4-ish in 2027. That reduction in FTE is pretty significant from current budgeted FTE numbers. But I wanted to kind of provide this just for context in terms of what we're looking at in terms of cost savings and additional revenue to be able to continue to fund the sheriff's office at a sustainable level pre-2030-ish. So again, just context, this is not in any way a recommendation. I want to be clear about that. So if we can skip to the next slide. First option is a jail or law enforcement levy. Would have to be voter approved. You have to 5 years. There's different ways an operating levy could be structured. You could do just a general sheriff's office levy over the whole county. You could do a kind of rural law enforcement district outside city limits. You could do a jail levy. I provided some figures there. 10 cents per thousand of assessed value would come out to about $340,000 a year. 50 cents per thousand comes out to about 1.7 million a year. I believe that's before applying any sort of assumed collection rate, which would be around 96%, 94%. So what I I think this is probably the most direct way to fill that gap over the next 5 years. But it doesn't come without significant cons, right? So I didn't just put one option in here because I think if this ultimately is the direction that it is decided we need to go, then it's going to be really important that we be able to explain to the public that we've turned over every stone, we've looked at every opportunity for funding. So there's a number of other options in here. And I just wanted to kind of run through quickly some of the cons. I would say, just before I get into the cons, the fact that we know there's going to be additional property tax revenue, especially by the mid-2030s, means that this may not have to be a recurring levy. It may be a one-time type of levy, but nonetheless, you still have to get voter approval. That is not always certain. So I have a list of cons in the memo. I noted property tax, the issue of compression. It's really not an issue right now in Crook County. There's that difference in assessed value. The fair market value is common, especially throughout Central Oregon, where fair market value is significantly outpaced the assessed value because of that 3% cap. Compression really isn't an issue, but if other taxing districts go out for levies, operating levies in particular, there's always the risk that, or any sort of tax increase, there's the risk that like $10 cap per thousand gets hit, and the operating levy would be the first thing to get compressed. So it's not a guarantee. Again, I don't think that there's an immediate threat to that in Crook County. Another con, if we narrowly tailor it to jail operations, it kind of constricts or limits how those funds can be used. So a specific levy that isn't a general kind of law enforcement operating levy, there'd be limits in terms of how those funds could be expended. And this isn't a sustainability solution, right? Because it's a 5-year solution. And even if you have to go out for a second year, there's no guarantee that it passes, and you're going to be back in the same boat unless there's additional property tax revenue that helps us fill those gaps. And to get back to my earlier point, I think an operating levy should only be pursued if it's absolutely necessary. If you're asking to increase the tax burden on your citizens, that's a big ask. And we'll need to be able to demonstrate that we've looked at all options before then. So I think this is an important option to highlight, again, because it does provide an opportunity to fill that gap in a meaningful way, but it's not the only option we have out there. So any questions about the levy?
I think on the levy, and Will we went to county college, and I met Andrew. He was a veteran, and then he became a sheriff, and now he's a county commissioner of Klamath. And so they have the same problem that we do. They spend about $10 million in their budget for police or sheriff down there. And so they decided to do a series of town hall meetings, which they did, and they had three levies basically on their ballot this last, I guess it would be in May. Anyway, there was public safety, which was for the sheriff, roads, and parks. There was a very low voter turnout, very, very low, but parks passed by 60%, roads passed by 60%, and 88% of the people denied the public safety. So it would take a tremendous amount of publicity or, like I say, I was very, when he told me about that, I was very interested, so I followed it. And so 88% against is a significant amount. So this would be a huge, it would be a very good solution, but it's a huge leap for us to get the people. And the other thing we have is I go for the jail more because we have Prineville Police and we have Sheriff. So we have 14,000 people here in the town who say, I'm doing okay, I've got the Prineville Police to call. And then you have 13,000 people outside who don't, who have the sheriff. But how would that match up? How much would someone on Meadow Lakes care about whether I have service employment? So that's the only thing about, and I agree with you, but that is some of the discouraging parts about a levy. It would have to be a really strong campaign.
Agreed. There's one con I didn't know, but I think it's very relevant. I've heard the sheriff speak to this before, but especially if you're having to go out for recurring levies, it can be, and this is true for other, whether it's a library levy or any other operating levy, having to go out on a recurring basis is very hard on the employees and the staff in that department, knowing that if there isn't voter support, their jobs become, I don't know if I'd use the word disposable, but certainly.
And maybe their feeling,
Yeah.
So that is something that, shouldn't be taken lightly. And yeah, again, this is just an option. I think it's something we need to discuss, but it may not be the best solution.
A couple months ago, I attended the Safety Campus grand opening in Redmond. They had great support from the community around that. So, there are also some possibilities that I think to answer a bit of like the fairness issue, I don't like bringing up our county to the west, as like the example, but where they have two different tax rates, one for cities and one for the county, recognizing that there's a difference in service level and responsibility to do that. So all of those things really need to be looked at. And I agree with the dangers in the 5-year, and even if you got it passed, then in 5 years, everyone, and you go for it again, but everyone will say, you said this was only 5 years. And so your credibility goes down. So, and I don't know the correct language about how taxing districts work, but is it a permanent, like if you had a sheriff's district or districts there that were permanent, then you wouldn't have to do that. I mean, you would go out if you needed to adjust it. Other than that,
yeah, this option really contemplates a temporary operating levy, not a permanent levy like Deschutes County has for their sheriff's office. So this would not be a permanent solution. And I think, given the potential tax revenue that we're going to see, the bulk of in 9 or so years, so still a ways out. I think, just frankly, I think, any sort of discussion about a permanent one, to the extent that's possible, is not going to be popular.
right. Well, I think there's ways to adjust. Like as a taxpayer myself, it's like, okay, well, if you're going to increase this tax to stabilize the sheriff's department, which I think is critical that we have stability, and for the employees of the sheriff's department to not be living on the edge, or our competitiveness being hurt because we live on the edge of it just not happening. That you'd have to give in somewhere else, to make that work. My point is, I think it's worth having serious conversation about what the possibilities are to try how do we get to real sustainable funding for the sheriff's department. The other thing that would help would be, this cut of the pie that is only, one size. In the sheriff's department, we have these great needs there, but it's kind of, in my mind, at the expense of the other departments of everything else in the county. So it's a unique situation. It needs to be, have its own funding. I think there's an argument for that.
From a feasibility standpoint, this would have to be voted on next fall.
Depends on what timing we.
We're talking about this, if we're talking about the 27 budget. Assuming that any May vote would have about a 2% participation.
But, and the other thing, and Scott brought this up at the last budget meeting at the very end when we were talking about it, you have this persona that up on the hill, all this gold is gonna come down that highway. So there's no way that you could go, I don't think, for over 5 years, because, and that would have to be part of the conversation. Yes, we do have a tremendous benefit up on top of the hill, but we need this period of time. Yeah, we have a gap, and you brought it up, and I think it was, we had a conversation about it, and that's very real.
All I want is everything without cost. Let's just do that.
You figured that out, and we'll sign the papers.
Speaking as a public.
And I want the sheriff's department to stay the way they are, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, you figured it out for us.
So, thinking outside the box here for just a second, don't throw stones at me, please. We have departments that are operating under their current financial stability that they have today. And I'm going to give an example of the library. Right? The library's fund is actually increasing year over year, and their percentage of tax base is set in the tax rate, right?
Yes.
There's going to be additional funding coming to the library when the data centers come online as a part of that permanent tax rate that they've been allotted. Is there any opportunity for us to revise tax rates of, I'm going to use the library as an example. I don't know if anybody's going to hit me. To maintain their operational needs, right? And not build their fund and take that excess, whatever that percentage is, right? I don't know the numbers, I don't have them in front of me. But use that excess to transition to the sheriff's department.
Yes, and I mentioned that, and I know you got this last memo right before the meeting, but there is an option in there about adjusting the property tax allocation.
Okay.
So the board set that, I think, in fiscal year 24 to its current division, so 57.7 goes to the sheriff's office, the rest goes to the general fund. Library gets a portion of that, So, yes, if that's what you're asking.
It is.
The board has the ability to adjust that allocation.
And I think with the core services, that we're going through the core services, I think we're identifying, what are our core services? Where can we streamline? And that is the biggest thing that we have, is to identify those core services. And then from there, we could do that.
Reallocate.
Because then you have maybe an FTE you don't need or whatever. But that's the key, is that Will has initiated this core service study. And I think that's really the basis of all of this work. Really, like you're talking, we're gonna have to use all these options, but we need to identify those core services and make sure that those are being provided. So how do we do that?
We're gonna shrink the portfolio.
We're gonna shrink the,
Portfolio.
I'm not gonna get on the subject of it, there will be others. So, okay, we have a smart aleck in the crowd, but you know what I'm saying, it's the core services that are identified. And from those core services, then we can go, and I agree with Steve, we're gonna have to use a little bit of every option.
I think it would be important that if the levy, you go out for the levy strategically, that the language is appropriate, because it isn't a long-term fix in my mind. This would be like, this is an interim operating levy in terms of something.
Well, it's also important to the employees of the sheriff's department.
Yeah.
Because they need that stability, or to know that they have the stability.
I think that to a certain extent underscores the importance of us continuing to take a deep dive into what does the data center revenue really mean to Crook County, because it could be the difference between just needing that 5 years and needing it to be on an ongoing basis. And, that there's some numbers provided in the material that you provided, but getting comfortable with those and understanding what they really mean for the county will help us understand that, what the ask would really be of the community. One of my goals here is, to, towards the end, kind of talk about next steps. If there's general consensus that this option warrants further conversation, I think, I think an important first step is reaching out to the public, engaging the public, finding out the likelihood of success, making sure we have at least an opportunity to pass it. If there appears to be no support, I need to put a lot of resources into it. I think we need to engage the public early and often. But those are my kind of final thoughts on this option before I move on.
You need to engage the city of Prineville and get buy-in, significant support from the city. I forget the people, but this has to be studied.
And there might be more support in that matter by doing one for corrections in the jail.
And that's exactly, yeah, well,
And that one could also help with the sheriff's department, because it would provide some FTEs for this responsibilities that they are doing now through the sheriff's department. Such as all this court security and numerous things.
yeah, it aligns with the city's objectives.
So it could help both, but only one. And I would probably recommend, if I was going to do it, not go for a 5-year, but for a permanent. For the jail. But that's not
Costs aren't gonna go down, that's for sure.
Okay, option 2. This one's a little outside the box. Given my history in community development and how we fund code enforcement, I thought I'd throw it out there. I can't find precedent for it. I'm calling it a public safety fee. This would be a fee that would be directly linked to the growth, population growth in the county. So new development will pay for some of the additional service requirements we're facing because of an increase in population. Yeah, again, just based on a growth pays for growth kind of principle. We apply a similar principle to some of our fees in community development. And I haven't taken a deep dive into the legality of it, but initially it looked like there was a path forward as long as it was, closely tied to the need for additional services related to the growth that we're facing. So this is just something that if there's interest in it, we could take a deeper dive into it. There are some downsides. We've added some fees in recent years within community development. To the extent the board wants to explore SDCs in the future, that would be another fee that's tacked on to development. So at a certain point, the accumulation of fees on people coming in for applications gets to be too much. I think we're still pretty competitive with our fees, if not the lowest in the region in terms of development fees. But it all starts to pile up. And at a certain point, it discourages development, especially for the couple trying to build their dream home and all of that.
So in San Luis Obispo County, and I'm not sure if it's through California, but in San Luis Obispo County, when you go for a permit, you have a Quimby fee, and it's called a Quimby fee, and that's exactly what it is. And what it's for is that as you build that house, you may need a fire truck, you may need the sheriff, you may need the police, you need park and rec. And that Quimby fee is divided up in a percentage as it comes in to those different buckets. So that's a very common thing. And I know in San Luis Obispo County, I'm assuming it's statewide, but I'm not gonna throw that out because I don't know. But it's just, and that's what it's called, the Quimby. So you might look into how the Quimby fees were originated.
Yeah, I would just say, I think it's worth looking at, but I think if we're gonna have the SCC discussion, we would wanna make sure to not just drop that and then drop this.
Yeah.
So you wanna talk holistically about the different things that we're missing in the county and have that conversation with the public at the same time.
And I agree with you. But the one advantage that I see with this process is that it goes through hearings and things. It's gonna put the pressure on the three of us.
Yeah.
Because we're the ones that can approve it, which is not a bad thing, I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
Versus, and incorporate this as an SDC and call this an SDC. The other approach that we have to look at is when we're trying to do all these road works and things and starting road districts. Now that the people have to vote for. So that's their option. They can either choose to do it or not to choose to do it. But this one is going to be forced upon new people, not the people that are existing. And so it does play a role in how much your county grows, but people, surrounding areas have these same fees, and it drives everybody over here because we don't have them. Then we have continued growth and without the compensation.
Yeah, without the infrastructure.
Kind of like mandates without.
Yeah, no, I agree, but I just think that they're both potential ideas, but we just need to make sure we get the buy-in. That's my point.
I think the public would like that the growth pays for growth because they hope they slow it down.
Yeah, that's a fair point
I hate
too.
to say that.
They would be much more in favor of this type of.
Oh, exactly. And like I say, the Quimby fee was just a comment, and it made sense to me when you paid it, because you are gonna need a fire truck or whatever, and that was how you did it.
I think to Will's point, the fee structure here is cheaper than,
Oh,
Here.
sure it is.
and I don't think this would be a speed bump in.
Stop in the house.
And the hypothetical revenue generation that I put in the memo on the screen here, that's just super quick. How many new single family dwellings permits have we issued on average over the last 5 years? I didn't factor in 2025, but I'm guessing the actual average is probably closer to 200 if you look at.
It's not a universal deal, but it's 1.5 FTEs, so. It's 1.5 FTEs, I mean, it's something.
I can
But it
put
doesn't have to limit to residential also, it can be in commercial and other things.
No, I think there's a number of ways it can be structured. And I just wanted a simple example, so I just went for new single family dwellings. You could look at, developers and the subdivisions and the partitions. Don't get a ton of those outside city limits, so maybe limited, but there's ways to, many different ways that this fee can be structured, and I was just trying to come up with a quick example. But again, if there's interest in looking into it further, understanding any sort of legal parameters, we can certainly do that.
And this is just single-family dwellings outside the city limits.
Yeah, I think, we'd have to have a conversation. Actually, I think those numbers include the city. So I have had conversations about, for example, our code enforcement fee. It's kind of a complicated formula. Maybe it's our long-range planning fee is based off of city and county permits. I think if you get in front of it, have a conversation with the city like I did before, I think they're pretty understanding of the need for this type of support.
I think the city realizes that the county has a perimeter around the city, and everybody that comes to the city has to go through the county. And so I think some just compensation there would be in line with their thinking also.
All right, option 3. So some cost containment measures. This could be structured differently, or the way we go about this could be done differently. But if you look at for fiscal year 27, a 5% reduction in materials and service, and capital outlay is not significant, but 10% reduction there. There's money there again. If you're counting FTEs, that's not insignificant, right? So one of the challenges with this is their materials and services. That line item includes all of the internal service fees that are charged. So it would really take a lot of buy-in from the county to support the sheriff's office on this, and taking a hard look at our internal service fees, making sure they're fair, equitable, and that we're using the right approach in terms of calculating those, and if appropriate, reducing them to a certain extent, because again, a huge chunk of that materials and services line item is dedicated to internal service fees.
Wouldn't that, if you're reducing those specific fees to the sheriff's office, the comparable same service fee to other departments would have to be similarly adjusted, and you'd end up just stealing from Peter to pay Paul?
Yeah, I mean, there may not be significant savings, but the ultimate goal would kind of taking a deep dive into our internal service fees would make sure that they're equitable across the organization.
It would just be reallocating money back to the sheriff from other departments you're taking it from, in essence.
But yeah, to a certain extent, yeah. But you also, the goal of that kind of review would not be necessarily sheriff's office focused in terms of, if we're just looking at internal service fees, we want to make sure it's equitable across the organization. The goal would be just to reduce internal service fees to the sheriff's office. I don't know.
I almost think a reallocation of the property tax or the percentages, which would be more equitable than what you're saying. Because you are robbing Peter to pay Paul. So if you reallocated those percentages, I would think that would be a more equitable way of doing it. Not to throw down your thoughts, Will, but.
It's what we're here for. I never said they were gonna all be good.
This question
But
would
we
be
expect
kind of like it's a zero-sum game,
Yeah, it's a shell game.
which helps the sheriff's office, but in turn reduces.
Yeah, I guess I'm not quite looking at it. I get totally what you're saying. But again, it's about just kind of reanalyzing our internal service fees, making sure they're equitable.
Which is a good thing to do anyway.
And to the extent there's opportunities, by cost savings, not only for the sheriff's office, but other departments. Making sure those internal services, putting resources to core services of those internal services.
That's what I mean.
I wonder if there's an argument to be made against being equitable, which is a word I'm really tired of anyway. But we're kind of in an emergency situation with the sheriff's department. And if they need to have, more grace from the county in some way, if that means that they pay, a lower rate for paper or administrative or whatever it is, maybe that makes sense to do that. And overall, it is just a one sum, right, game here, and but we can choose to do that. It's our game. Intentional. And so you can take the equitable part and they make everybody feel good about the fairness of it. But I just wonder if it could be taken too far and not utilized as a tool.
I like internal service fees because I think it really outlines what your expenses are closely. I think that there is some benefit maybe to readdressing the internal service fees for the sheriff's department. And that can be based on, it's still gonna cost money, so the money's gotta come from somewhere, but it would probably have to come from the general fund. Based on the fact that their internal service fees have increased so much is because of the facility that we're sitting in. And that is not necessarily completely their responsibility because the courts require the presence of the sheriff's department and et cetera. So there's many avenues there that can be used to equitably adjust those rates to the sheriff's department.
Responsibly, could we use a different word?
Yeah. So that to me is an option to lessen their budget, but it's still going to be money that has to come from someplace.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, option 4. I might have to lean on Christina a little bit on this one. I just learned about this earlier this week. It sounds like there's some precedent for some counties to fund emergency management through internal service fees. Christina, was it Deschutes County?
Yeah, that's the model Deschutes County is basically because emergency services are used by all of the departments. It's more of that risk management, kind of like we have that risk management fund that's an internal service fund. Because the sheriff's office is not the only person that benefits or is required to have the emergency management support.
As an example, or AJ can speak to this better than I can, but our emergency management plan includes, there's some need to have kind of contingency planning within departments, like kind of worst case scenario. What's the phrase I'm looking for?
Continuity of operation?
No, like the, if somebody's unavailable, there's an emergency, somebody's, like department head's not available, like having plans in place so that each department can continue to provide the service in case during an emergency. So there is a countywide benefit. One of the big ones is grant applications. A lot of grant applications require you to have a natural hazards mitigation plan. There's other emergency management handles. So there's a countywide kind of benefit to it. My vision for this is, one, we're anticipating reduced funding for emergency management from the state. And this would just kind of backfill that, right? So we get some funding, great. The internal service fee would cover the rest to ensure that we continue to have emergency management. This isn't like a discretionary function for the county. Emergency management is a requirement. So finding a way to make sure we continue to fund that despite potential support from the state is important. So that's why I incorporate this. This doesn't move the needle significantly, but it ensures we continue to have a functioning emergency management.
I noticed that there wasn't a numerical value or percentage attached to this. Can you provide any sort of a ballpark?
I think it would vary year to year depending on funding. So do you have like an idea of what it's being reduced by?
So if we don't get any funding, it's around $325,000 toward emergency management, that piece of it.
And we could assume that the state may not be passing this may indeed be going away.
Yes, that they give us between 70 and 90,000 depending upon the extras that they sometimes kick in there. It actually has to do with some of the sanctuary state issues that are, because it is federal funding that's passed down to the states. That's part of what it's being worked through.
But it's about 3 1/4 whether the state,
So the state only funds
70 to 90, but
the total cost is
total
about
cost is 3 1/4, so it's gonna be 3 1/4 less 70 to 90, or all 3 1/4.
Correct. And in our fiscal year 26 budget, we did not budget any grant funding, so it is only being funded by.
Is some of the funding going to the emergency management?
Part of the data center numbers for payment of the taxes from those as well as.
The only thing I would say is if they go at 0, that affects all counties in the state, not just eastern counties. And so I would say that there's a likelihood that there'll at least be something. Because you have Multnomah, you have Washington and Clackamas that need those funds as well.
That's not really the issue. The issue is that the feds are requiring the immigration part, and no Oregon county can technically comply with that. So they're trying to push it out to the counties and say, it's your responsibility to determine with your legal counsel if you can comply with those rules or not. They're not going to do it for you.
I wrote down the figures today, but I participated in a SNAP thing today. And the money that we are going to lose in SNAP because of the refugee and the sanctuary is like totally, like I said, I have all the figures and I should remember, but I don't, but yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Just on food assistance.
But again, I mean, the ARC is not the most effective organization in the
Well,
state.
we hope it is.
I wish it was more effective.
We need to hope it is.
But again, if it's Multnomah County and us in the office talking about it, the legislature is obviously going to be more willing to move forward. And I've been looking for some of these things for a long time, to get all counties on board with something, and especially emergency management.
Yeah.
So there's so many different parts to the state, and so I'm not saying guaranteed we could get some money, but I think that would be a pretty easy sell to.
And when I went to the Pilt fly-in, he would have been very proud of me. There was 5 other commissioners with me around the table in the Senate. And part of it all depended, we did a kind of a chemistry, depending on what you thought was best, but I used the 83-year-old woman who took the wrong turn after the baby shower, almost died of hypothermia. She would have been found an hour later, she would have died. And my comment was, she's just an 83-year-old woman, but she's somebody's mother, somebody's grandmother, somebody's sister. And how would you feel? And that really hit. It really hit home, like you say. So I did use your department as an example in my what do I want to say, my propaganda stuff. It was the truth. It was the truth. So yes, I was looking out for you, AJ.
Okay, option 5. Mr. Herrick and Scott, this is the property tax allocation.
Yes, okay, here we go.
Yeah.
I like this no voter approval meeting. That helps a lot.
I should have waited.
So I have some estimates in there. I also have a little bit of the history. So prior to 2024, as far as I can tell, the allocation was, I probably have that in here, 63% went to the sheriff's office. and it may have been 2023, but that there was I think prior to the adoption of the fiscal year 2024 budget, that allocation was adjusted to 57.7%. So I have some basic kind of math in here in terms of what that could mean, at least initially, if property tax increases year after year. This number would change, but 1% based on an assumption of $12,900,000 in property tax revenue would be $129,000. So if you adjusted that back closer to what it was previously, say you add 3% to it, that would be $390,000 in additional revenue to the sheriff's office. 2% would be 260, 1%, 129. One of the pros of this is it provides immediate kind of recurring funding to the sheriff's office. So this is something that can be sustained long term. And as Commissioner Herman noted, it's a straightforward change. Does not require an external process. It's up to the board to approve that allocation adjustment. Downside is it does result in a corresponding reduction to the general fund. It doesn't increase the overall property tax pool. Those numbers all stay the same. The reduction to the general fund may erode certain sheriff's office services. So there's trade-offs there for sure. And again, some of my bullet points seem a little repetitive, but it's not a new revenue solution. It's just a reallocation.
Why was it reduced from the 63 to 57? What was the thought at that time? Were you around when they did that? Seth?
Christina might know.
That was because we allocated additional different funding sources to the sheriff's office instead of property taxes. So they got additional funding sources outside of what was just property taxes.
So that's
So they got a portion of the data center, the alcohol tax, cigarette tax. Thought was diversify the funding sources, that way regardless of what happens with property taxes, they have stable funding in other.
And those other fundings are gone away, or they're still?
No, they're
still there.
So the 57%.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. The 57% is actually a higher dollar amount than the previous percentage they got because of all the other revenues they now have a portion of.
Again, it's a zero-sum game, right? Goes there, comes from somebody else.
Yeah, it's just a show.
Rob Peter to pay Paul.
That's all it is.
It is what it has to be.
Any further conversation on that? So option 6 is really just here to, provide more context than really being any sort of solution. But the work that the consultant did in analyzing property tax revenue and the impact on the sheriff's office, they took a more aggressive approach in terms of assumptions for property tax revenue. So I think they were assuming that 5.1% versus what we have in our budget document, which is 4% for 2027 and 3% thereafter. This does make a difference in terms of, when we're looking out year after year in our forecasts, in terms of revenue in particular, that does impact revenue, and it's just something to keep in mind. But yeah, taking a conservative approach when we're budgeting is a good idea. But just, based on current trends, there is a likelihood that revenue is going to be a little bit higher than what we're putting into the budget.
So the trend is 5%, but what's the range there? I mean, have we actually ever been down to 3% in recent history? With any growth, it doesn't seem like it's possible.
We did trend around 3% from 2008 to now, basically.
So maybe that's that recession impact. that we're
Yeah,
talking
the
about.
recession is a piece of it that.
And I did, as part of this option in the memo, I did include a table that shows kind of what the difference, property tax revenue, what the difference would be at 5% versus 4 and 3%. I also included in that table, based on the prior conversation about property tax allocation, what the potential revenue may be if there's, at current budgeted revenue forecast, and also that higher, this the trending 5% as well. If we adjusted allocations 1.5% up for the sheriff's office. And more for information, just something to keep in mind in terms of total, the trend in terms of revenue. That I think we should be budgeting conservatively. We don't, we know we're going to get 3%, or should be getting a 3%, but there's some positivity out there in terms of what revenue has been, and hopefully will continue to be. So let's move on to option 7. So option 7, I'm calling this a reserve stabilization policy. The thought behind this is if the county sells.
Oh, I just didn't, I was, yeah, I got it. I was trying to.
Let me know if I can clarify. So the thought behind this is if the county sells.
I thought we were selling merch.
Maybe a couple of liquor stores.
Just start a YouTube channel.
Yeah, I mean, there's some, we can get some CC shirts.
We'll put a booth out for the courthouse for use.
That's right, a carnival marker.
There you go.
Yeah, no, to clarify, I'm talking about the sale of county-owned real estate. I made up the 25% number, but the theory behind this is if the county sells real estate, let's say we sell a piece of property that's worth $500,000, normally I think the best practice would be to put that money into your capital reserve. Here, instead of doing 100% of that, 25% would go to, first to the sheriff's office reserve fund to help kind of stabilize that. That would, 25% would be 125,000. I have 700,000 up there, that's why my numbers are off. But 175 and $700,000 in real estate sales would go to help stabilize the sheriff's office reserve. Once that's stabilized, we also have an unfunded PERS liability because we do have some PERS employees. We need to start planning for that so we can continue this kind of stabilization policy, continue beyond just the sheriff's office reserve. And then we also still have the outstanding loan from capital reserve to the sheriff's office as part of this year's budget. But this is just an effort to try and stabilize the reserve fund for the sheriff's office.
So with these sales, would it be accurate to say that the majority of that are from foreclosed properties?
Yeah, and just I should have explained a little bit. So I have, currently I have on my desk a list of all the county-owned properties, and I'm trying to go through that to identify what properties hold long-term strategic value to the county that we should not be considering getting rid of. Identifying those that might have some potential long-term value that maybe we just want to hold on to until we have a better idea. But there's going to be some, whether it's a foreclosed property in Juniper Acres, or, a piece of property. For example, we partitioned off of the airport a few years ago, a 5-acre parcel, right at the roundabout, Matama Call. We had it listed, haven't sold it. That doesn't hold long-term strategic value to the county. It's something, in my mind, the lawyer in me says, it's just an outstanding liability. Like something's gonna happen. Like, why are we holding on to that? So, let's identify those properties. That's one of my goals with going through all the county-owned properties and identifying the ones that could potentially be appropriate for us to sell.
So do these properties that we haven't received revenues on because they haven't paid the taxes, are those kept on the books as a receivable? I mean, they're an asset on the books of the county? If they are, then it seems to me that when you sell that property and you recover those taxes, then that would go back to the county in capital. That would make sense. If it were property that the county just owns, it wasn't foreclosed, like we were just talking about, then I could see this kind of thing making sense.
And I kind of agree with Bill because we have that Supreme Court ruling, so all we can get on foreclosed property is our costs, which need to be paid back to the various, we're not really getting any profit because that profit is all going to the state.
Right.
So I do agree that it has to be, I don't think foreclosed is gonna work there.
Yeah.
Because then you're really, again, robbing Peter to pay Paul, and you need to pay Paul because they've done that work.
On a separate note, you mentioned the phrase underfunded PERS liability. What is that numerical dollar amount, just out of curiosity?
It's a big number. It's about $6 million. As of the end of 2023, we have a biennium that they do the evaluation on, so the next one will come out at the end of this year.
Okay.
Yeah, it went from $3 to $6 million in 2 years.
Wow. Yeah, and I assume is the rate of funding accelerated, or would we assume that is a growing from 6 liability?
Part of it was based on the lack of return that PERS received. They had anticipated a 14% return and only received 4% return on some of those funds. So I would anticipate it, unfortunately, to increase, hopefully at not that accelerated rate, but I don't ever see opportunity for it going down until we start.
That's amazing. The state of Oregon assumes a 14% return rate on their investment dollars.
Yeah.
If I quoted that, I'd be thrown out of the business.
Yeah, I'd like to know where they got
Yeah, I've
the
done it the
getting
last couple of years, but you can't assume.
Yes,
That's
it
amazing.
was.
Not only that, then guarantee the recipients a return.
Yeah.
That's,
No comment. Anyway, okay, well, that's not for today's, I'm just curious. We don't want to talk about that anymore.
Yeah.
All right, I won't say any more on that.
So this was something Will and I've talked about. This wouldn't be specific for the sheriff's department, but at our county college last night, Bob brought up how many loads of gravel were leaving the county. Brad, would you tell us what that is again? I can't remember if it was 1 million or 4 million.
Brad's still on there.
Go ahead, Brad.
wake up, Brad.
He's gone.
He has to unmute himself.
Lights are on.
So what is the,
So the idea, I've heard other counties doing this, and that they put a premium or a amount that you charge when you leave the county with gravel. Because that costs, work on our roads. I'm sure they get in accidents where the sheriff's department have to show up and, there's administration that the county does for all that. And so if you could put a dollar amount per load or per yard that left the county, not
I
county
have
by
a
county.
client that owns the biggest gravel facility in Washington County, and I know that he pays a pass-through fee to the county for that.
Yeah. And so
For,
it's
Exporting.
exporting, I think if you're moving it inside the county, we're not losing that natural resource. I think that's less of a argument because I think we want to take care of our people here. But if it's leaving and going to Deschutes County, is Brad back?
He's not answering. I don't know.
But even if it's 1 million and we do $4, I don't know, is that a crazy amount?
$4 per ton.
Yeah,
Might be a little rich, but.
or $2.
I think that's.
Let's say, let's say you say $1. $1,
I could do that.
there's $1 million that we're adding to the pool.
But how do you go about getting that? Do commissioners do that, or does is the state
I
gonna
think
say?
the county collected by
How does
the,
that go?
yeah, it would
How do
be
you
collected
do
by the person at the field and then they would,
Well, yeah, they're gonna say that we sold so many tons of Deschutes this month, we cut a check, is what they're gonna do.
Yeah.
It's just like me, and I think we ought to increase our landfill of people bringing garbage to us. We don't need any more garbage, but
We do have a higher fee.
it's not enough.
Oh, no,
In my opinion.
well, but Jackie, last
A
night,
higher.
we brought that up, that we do need some of that revenue coming in to pay for our operations.
Yeah,
And I think there's room to bump it up more,
yeah, I
but
think
you
we
just
have,
don't wanna get past the
no, you don't
threshold
wanna
where
get
you're
too
losing
crazy, but
that money coming in.
there's room. There's definitely room. I
Yeah.
think.
So, I don't know, hopefully I'm not stealing any thunder. We've talked about that a few times, and I think it would be worth looking into. At how many tons that is, and
You
what,
don't remember what he said last
it
night.
was 1 or 4, I can't.
1 or 4 million.
Yeah.
I kind of figured we'd run out of time to talk about the road department. I was preparing a couple of comments about the road fund. I was gonna highlight, Mr. Crawford's, work on putting that fee together. We did learn that Columbia County has something similar. It is, I think, a viable opportunity to eat into some of that, the amount of the reserve we use every year out of the road fund reserve. I think it's about $500,000 a year on average. And this is an opportunity to significantly limit that and potentially increase revenue for road projects.
What does that other county charge? You
I
know?
don't remember off the top of my head. They've had a lot of problems, it sounds like, with figuring out how to kind of accurately collect data and report on it. But they are, they're generating $500,000 a year, so maybe a little more, but.
I think 4 would be, I agree with Brad, 4 is
It's pretty steep.
pretty steep.
Yeah, but I think it's, excuse me, but
Just the raw material per ton cost, I'm trying to think of what that is, but I want to say it's only around $10 or $12 a ton for the raw material as it is. So a $4 lift
Yeah.
would be pretty substantial as a percentage basis.
But like you're taking that aggregate that's coming out of that one plant, I think it's 17, 18, 19, somewhere in there.
Is that delivered cost or is that?
I'm not,
Yeah.
actually, it would be delivered, yes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
that's
so,
why.
but I just think
But
it's
it's
an
a good idea.
opportunity to
No, it's a good,
put some money back in the pool, and I think that,
or give it to the road needs it.
the road needs it, but I think you could also spread some of that into the county for administrative costs in different departments, and
I think that's a very good idea.
Give it back to Christine for all the money we're about to take away from her.
Yeah, the sheriff's office can start to find the folks who aren't reporting accurately and.
there you go.
So,
And then we give them a citation, and then we get more money.
You don't get money from citations.
Nope, not $1.
State,
Okay,
It all goes to the state.
Oh, darn, okay, that's not fair, we need to change that too.
Well, we talked
We
about
talked
that.
about
Yeah.
it.
Seth and I went down that road.
We went down into that rabbit hole and it was not lucrative.
I remember when you talked about it.
Trying.
Yeah.
We don't run enough citations in this county. And quite frankly, I don't think the county can handle enough citations to justify justice. I just don't.
If we start hitting these gravel guys. maybe.
Yeah, maybe, I mean,
Yeah, we're
I
gonna
think you need to set up a jump scales on Johnson Creek Road. Whenever the state scales open, everybody's on Johnson Creek.
I'm surprised you witnessed that, sir. I know guys that go that way, whether scales are open or not, just in case.
That's right, they do. And they are way overloaded.
Okay.
do we have any questions and answers yet on that?
Well, I guess my question to the folks in the room is, listed a number of options. From funding just what we can afford to public safety fee to materials and services caps or reductions. Do you guys, does anybody have any other thoughts, ideas, recommendations at this point?
I have some. Just thoughts. Healthcare was my first one, which we've already discussed. But the other opportunities that I would like to talk about is the video lottery fund. I realize a large portion of that goes to funding the fairgrounds, but I also see that the remaining portions of that go to community development efforts that are, what would they be losing if we didn't give them the funding? EDCO, Chamber of Commerce, I don't know if that's dedicated funding for COCC. I see there's an allocation to the COCC fund in there. But EDCO and Chamber of Commerce, what's the impact to them if they don't receive that funding?
Yeah, I think EDCO is something that really does bring a lot of economic development to our community. And we put that money towards to have somebody that's there to answer those questions on a regular basis.
What does it fund for the EDCO though?
It funds us having a person here to,
So are we the only ones paying into that? Is the county the only one that's
the
contributing?
city and county match that.
And private, it's about 50-50 or has been private and public.
It's a little less public,
So it's-
private than that, but
Is that right?
yeah.
So it's roughly 25% of their funding for Crook County.
I'd say more like 40%.
Or like 40.
35, 40. Yeah.
What they do is they funnel and promote businesses entering Crook County. For instance, these AV, this big defense contractor that just moved here from Bend with several hundred employees and 4 acres of buildings. Probably wouldn't be here without Ed Crook Rodeo. So they provide, I won't say majority, but they certainly accelerate businesses moving to and developing, and back, all the way back to the data center.
Yeah.
Business, I mean, they were crucial, partial, they contributed, so that's cheap money. And I'm on the board of EDCO, so I have prejudice, or EDCO for county, so I have prejudice there, maybe I shouldn't comment, but I think that they're doing.
It's a good question.
Yeah, absolutely. They are the primary commercial economic driver of business development in Crook County. And as they are in Deschutes County for the comfortable one, they are in Jefferson County for the comfortable one. There's one in each county in the region. They're all under the central Oregon umbrella.
Okay.
Just cheaper though, I don't know.
Throwing it against the
I
wall.
don't know about the
Their
cheaper.
contribution to EDCO just went up recently, but we also have someone full-time. Looks after our interests.
Dedicated resource.
Yeah.
And then the Chamber of Commerce,
I'm not gonna say a word of it either. The one thing about like, we had transient funds, and last year they amounted to $780,000, and they were divided out, I wanna say, so much went to the general fund, so much went to the chamber, so much went to the fairgrounds, we had a tourism pot. I think I covered the pots, right? So, oh, museum, yeah, museum got some too, yeah. So we have the ability as commissioners, we meet the 3 conditions that we can change some of those allocations. And so that's a discussion that we need to make there too. And I'm sorry that in tourism, there was a bill where they were trying to do some of the tourism dollars to emergency management.
Roads and sheriffs.
But that didn't go.
Because
Which
it makes, because when tourists come to town,
Then you have, and I wish
you
we
have an
could,
increased need for sheriffs that are
Yes.
using your roads. We already established that we're not getting road taxes from those tourists because they don't live here and they don't have vehicles here.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's never gonna happen. I think that there's a lot of county, like the coast, I mean, we don't even hold a light to them for the amount of tourists that they see in a year. And their infrastructure's even, there are some of those counties, if you look, people are moving away and they've got even less money coming in. And so I think that's something definitely to push on.
And part of the transit tax, transient tax problem too, is that the preponderance of that revenue is for facilities that are in the city, and the city gets it all.
Well, if they
the city
stay in
gets
the
a
city.
large majority. I'm just talking
majority, I
about,
mean, obviously Versada comes to the transit tax.
which is,
Every motel here in town goes to the city.
Yes.
Yeah.
but in the county, last year, we received $780,000, so it's a very good funding.
Absolutely.
And again, I think the chamber is a little rich on their percentage. I think they were redoing their chamber offices and all of that. And I think there's a possibility that we can lessen some of that by changing percentages. That's something we haven't
And
got on the board yet, but we need to.
potentially increase the fairgrounds and then that would go.
Well, what really I would like to do is, and Christina okayed it a couple days ago, she said it was possible, was to take some of that money and go into a capital improvement, and it would just be, there is no fairgrounds capital improvement account right now. So if we were to establish from that, I think the city would come in and match us, and then that would be, we'd have to do an MOU and have a capital improvement list that was devised by the rodeo and the fairground. And that's all doable things, but we need to go in and re-talk how that comes from.
that distribution.
And that saves the fairgrounds their rodeo rent, which is cost of operations, but it also enables the city and the county to now start to say, hey, we're in here together and we're going to start funding capital improvements. And it would be its own, the biggest thing to me is it's its own entity. And that would be how we would do it.
Gotcha.
I think
So
the biggest
There's a
need for,
distribution.
aside from sheriffs, is that the county does have a lot of infrastructure. I mean, there's a reason that the county does crack seals on the road, because it saves a ton of money down the road. And the county does own significant infrastructure, such as the fairgrounds, that have been about 5 or 10 years delinquent in crack seal, where you're gonna have a much bigger cost down the road. So to me, avoiding the black hole of huge infrastructure costs down the road, along with the sheriffs, are the 2 biggest things I see us looking at in the year ahead.
Just seeing in the agenda, do we need to ask for public comment again?
Yeah.
Sure.
When you guys are, I guess.
You're supposed to get a break.
We could just do that since we're in the discussion part.
Yeah.
Is there anyone online or in the public for comments? Nobody raised their hand online or anything? Okay, good. then not good. That is what it is. And, so we can continue the discussion.
So just to wrap up, I guess the video lottery fund, just being diligent around the allocation of those funds in future budget cycles and seeing if there are any opportunities to fund public safety out of that fund. And something else that I thought about, I was reading all the documentation, and it came up around the healthcare piece where there was, that potential impact to the employees paying additional costs for their coverage. I don't feel that, penalizing the public employee makes sense for this effort, because they're then shouldering the entire burden, not the entire burden, but the burden that they're now going to fund, right? Which doesn't feel fair. And, with, there's the $100,000 discretionary fund for the county commissioners. And, we evaluated that spend when we did the mid-year review, and see that it's going to, good causes, but it's still discretionary money that's there. And if, a 10% lift on health insurance for employees raises $275,000, and we have $100,000 in discretionary spend for the commissioners, I think that's a bad look. And so before we start asking people to pay more money or asking for more money, I think we really need to see if we're being disciplined in our own spend and if that is necessary. So,
It's a very good point.
Food for thought on the next budget cycle.
That's good.
And you also reduce your competitiveness, because once you start doing that, and we already have a problem with losing sheriffs to other counties. So you are, not even just a sheriff, you are reducing your competitiveness, because that's a benefit that is why some people come out of the private sector.
Yes.
So I would add that point to your.
One question, the new solar farms going in, is that generating immediate tax revenue, or is that also on a deferral program?
It's not on a deferral program yet.
Yet is the key word.
Yeah.
So still in conversation about the tax revenue coming from the new solar farms on the highway? Okay, so that's an unknown entity at this point.
Can we put a tax on energy leaving? We're gonna do ag.
Is there an export of energy?
Can we get our
Just to
sun,
say-
that it's our sun, and so we need,
A kilowatt tax?
I
Or
don't
you
care.
just do a single solar panel tax of $1 and it'd be $1 million, right?
There you go. But I mean, you're talking about your natural resources.
So are we anticipating that being deferred on the same schedule as the data centers?
Probably not on the same schedule, no.
Shorter runway?
Or potentially longer.
Oh,
What
that was a nice, thank you for saying that one.
I think that, we've had conversations. Nothing, the county has not committed one way or the other in terms of whether we want to enter into some sort of tax deferral program on that site. There are some benefits to doing so, including potential community benefit kind of payments that would come along with that. It would obviously would come with some upfront compensation, which may be helpful in the near term. We have not made a decision on that.
Didn't they just lose a bunch of federal credits that they were supposed to get?
I don't know anything in person.
I've heard that.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the big drives for getting this all in, because they have to get it used up.
Before they run out.
But the idea is to get more money up front now, and if we do that, maybe we extend the period. So it's kind of a negotiation type of, like, because we're looking for money now. And if we had to extend it, put more money down.
Now, this is off the subject, but on that community, the 100,000, that's the community thing. How much does the city give on community benefit? I don't, you know, I've never thought about that, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, again,
Are
because
we
all
more-
that money's going to their
Well,
transient room tax,
and-
because all the ones we're helping, that's kind of been my point for a long time.
well, yeah, I mean, I'm just
Make
thinking, because high school rodeo
$150
comes
every
here, we don't lose them to Burns because we give them the facilities for free. They're walking up and down the streets here.
Staying in hotels.
What, I'm wondering if we could, I wonder how I ask that discreetly. How much do you give?
But a lot of our thought, and I totally agree with you, we could probably get away with it, but a lot of our thought in the things that we do is compensate another department. So the fairground, or the fairgrounds holds those
And gets that money.
and gets that money. And then that organization doesn't have to pay for it.
Right.
So if you have to be considered of who the organization is. But that's where, basically why that fund is there.
And you're right, what it does is give them the cost of operating, and it's, yeah, so when we're asked, we know the exact amount, and that check Christina gives to the fairgrounds. So their cost of operations is covered, which most of the time it is the fairgrounds. I'm trying to think of any other thing that other
We
than
do a
like
little
part
bit to
support and part
To
support.
the garbage service, to the
Yeah,
different charitable organizations and
Yeah.
things like that, but it's, mostly community.
Yeah.
And, backing up the county.
The last thing that I'll mention that I see as an opportunity for the county, and I brought this up previously, and there's a little resistance on it, but I think it can be worked through. Thomas, our weed master, had mentioned that 60% of the work that he performs, I'm trying to remember the number exactly, it was 60-ish% of the work that he performs is out of district. And that the rates that he charges don't cover his expenses. And so that's being funded by taxpayer dollars, right? Because he's not getting all of his dollars back.
No, he actually makes money, and that's how he provides the service to the citizens.
He is making money.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
so
we don't pay,
he made a comment that
very,
he,
the road department does give him money to do services for them, but anything he does outside of the roads for the county is completely paid for by his contracts.
so his comment about his rate that he bills doesn't cover his expenses was incorrect?
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Because that came from Thomas.
You may have
We
some,
had the county college, what's that?
you may have some contracts that don't fully cover the cost. The BLM one has been a challenge, especially with the issues we've had renegotiating it under the number they've had problems with. It's another story. But he's able to recoup those costs with the billings he has on other contracts. There are
Okay.
no direct transfers from any other fund in the county to support the weed department. So
Yeah, I
he
was
does
gonna
have to
say.
support himself and make sure he operates
he
within
wouldn't
his
be there.
means.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
Yeah.
So, okay, then that's me.
You need to join county college. You have that answer. Just last night. Just that last night.
Thanks, Scott. Does anybody else have anything else they want to throw out there? Maybe that's the last one. All right, so I'd kind of like to talk about next steps. One of my goals today is to, get some feedback, which I think I've got some good feedback from the budget committee and board on a few things. And so I just kind of, while I have everybody here, I just kind of want to run through a little bit of what I heard and some next steps, staff can work on as we get ready for fiscal year 27. So, I guess as far as the hiring pause, I didn't hear any kind of pushback to that, so is there kind of support for continuing to explore cost benefit to that or potential savings?
I think strategically it makes sense, just as a good business model in general, to be diligent for replacement employees, especially with AI and with contract capabilities. So I think that's just good business practice in general. It may create some pain for the existing employees, but if worked appropriately, it's actually more efficient, more effective.
Certainly more effective than in the corporate world where they overhire and then lay off and hire and lay off. I would rather see what you're proposing. And I think a workforce in general would rather see that.
So we've been relatively quiet back here. I just wanted to talk about the hiring pause. So we as an agency, mid-23, started this. And we've all been in the same room with budget conversations, and the first time you're like, yes, this is bad, could be potentially bad. So we put the brakes on. And we put the brakes on again this last fiscal and gave back over 12 employees. I don't know how we got 0.6, but
Short.
So we're, yeah. So we have brought ourselves into a position, and we've, with Will's help, done a core services and talked to the commissioners, and everybody knows that we're basically on the red line with our positions and service levels. And so all of the conversation today has been fabulous, but it's all very future. And we right now are making decisions based on the now and how long it takes to hire people and how long it takes to train people and keeping our current staff. So, I have positions open now to fill, and I have fears in putting people in those positions, because we continue down the path of maybe. And so I appreciate this, and hopefully the next steps for us in some direction of hiring, is, go out and hire those 4 open positions in the jail and 3 open positions in patrol and have a robust service level. We'll do whatever needs to happen with whatever dollars we have. I think our sheriff said that, and we always have. But having the commitment and knowing that come budget very soon, right? What is it gonna look like? It takes time to get a levy. It takes time to put special, taxes out there. It takes time to, capture money through attrition in other departments, right? So, it's hard for us because we're in the right this minute. And you guys know that. I have said it multiple times, but, and we have a lot of commitment from the people in the room to say, we want this. We all want it. But the reality is, when you look at that fund going negative in 18 months, I have to make the change right now because, the people that are tied to those dollars are what we're talking about. So I'll stop. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that, Stephanie. You and I have talked a lot.
You worked, I think, very hard, yeah.
I very much want what you're asking for today as
I know
well.
it's not gonna be a today thing.
But I think what we're trying to do today is set ourselves up to be as well positioned as we get into the discussions about fiscal year 27, to be able to give you not only a number for future, for this next fiscal year, but for coming year. So what I'm trying to do is get feedback on what the budget committee and the board want a deeper dive into in terms of potential options for not only funding the sheriff's office, but also funding, the general fund in the case of the conversation today. So, and to the extent I was discussing the hiring pause a minute ago, what I'm proposing with that is more a pause for the general fund supported departments, right? So, we're talking about the general fund. So you and I talked, and I hope we continue to talk about like filling those essential positions that are open. Because you do have budgeted FTE at this point. I understand the concern about the future, so we'll keep that going. But just rolling through the options again, kind of focusing on the general fund first. I talked about the materials and services cap. Long term could be detrimental. To Steve's point a minute ago about deferred maintenance and all of that, not necessarily something we want to do, but it is an option to, if we put a plan in place to cap materials and services at 2%, whatever, it may lessen the drawdown on the general fund over the next few years. So, any interest in us providing, kind of diving into that anymore?
Well, I think we'd have to look at it.
Yeah.
We've been there before.
I mean, would you guys just want to tell me, like,
I think we should look at all of it, and the only one I think that we should pump the brakes on is the health insurance.
Well, I think
But
that,
just looking for alternatives, like privatization and some different things like that. But
The insurance as a whole.
yeah, looking at it as a whole of what that looks like. But I didn't see anything up there that I thought was crazy or, I mean, I know that's basically your job a lot harder because you got a lot more things to do. But I think all those things, and I think, some of them we look at, we'll quickly find are not viable and we can move on. But I didn't see any, I thought it was really helpful that you brought up all these ideas. Well, I really appreciate it.
I don't see the health insurance. I think Christina explained it very well when she said that she went out for bids last year. Right? And we got the best bid that we could get for the coverage that we have. So unless we're gonna reduce the coverage or have the employee, I kind of agree, is health really something we should pursue? At this time, I don't think we should.
Yeah.
I think we keep that, that's our competitive, that's the benefit of working for the county. And that would be my feeling also.
As somebody who enjoys just paying 10%, I'm all in favor of that, but.
But you know what I'm saying, I just think that's the thing that we all said we really don't want to, and I think Christina answered it. Yes, it's a high cost, but we did bid it out. And so we did it competitively in the best way that we could do it.
I think this will be health insurance, the cost of health insurance is gonna be a recurring conversation until things get under control in that area. But I really appreciate the feedback we got about health insurance. I think there's a couple of good potential paths that we should absolutely explore, especially if there's a potential for not only cost savings for the county, but benefit potentially even to employees in terms of total cost. So I'm excited about the options.
you don't need to reinvent the wheel on that stuff either. The Shoes counties, I mean, you just go piggyback a model of success in terms of investigating it.
Yeah.
Don't start out from ground zero.
Well, now you give yourself another option back.
I think option under number 7, I think that we need to look at that, dissect that a little bit. I feel it's a little bit of a shell game. And if we're wanting to transfer funds from sales and things, I think there's other ways to do it rather than just a 25% dedication. Because, I feel it's an asset that I would rather like to hold stuff, not of course it's on the property, but not generally using those funds for operations, because once we use them, they're gone. And it's not a gone product right now. It's an asset that, can help us in other ways. Because we can't continue to go down that road and do that.
We only have so much property.
Right.
And you can't do it when you're foreclosed, so there you are.
I think that one of the things that I always try and do when I'm modeling a business model out forward, and I appreciate you talking about the timeline, looking at the, the reserve drawdown is, obviously we're looking at a 27 budget, but looking at a 5-year rough stretch out, as you were budgeting, 28 through 30 for that potential of a reserve drawdown, and I think 27 should keep in mind 28, 29, 30, 31, 32. And you alluded to that, but I think part of this core services thing is going to help you build that tool, but having a rolling tool that lends itself, that 27 lends itself to the other years, having perspective on those other years and what that looks like is going to better allow you to build a better 27 and 28. And having a rolling 5-year out kind of broke ground, to me, is always more informative to the current budget. And that's forward for you.
It's good.
Going back to what you just said, Susie, about the cost of foreclosed or capturing the dollars of the foreclosed property and not being able to income from that. There's a caveat in that law where you can also associate any costs associated with your selling of that property.
Yes, you
So
recover
you
your
can-
costs,
okay.
but you're not recovering anything over that.
Right.
So that's why 25, if you took 25% from that, you're taking really 25% from your people that have done the job, and they should be compensated.
Including the tax bill.
Yes, oh no, it's the tax
And the
bill,
tax bill.
but it
should
took, and then it
help.
took notification to make sure if there was an error, and it took,
Yeah.
you're looking from legal to assessor to finance, you're looking at a whole, and yes, you have that cost, but you need to give that cost back to those departments.
Correct.
So
I was just
yeah.
making sure you.
It's kind of
that we weren't
25%,
That
no,
that cost.
no.
We were recapturing.
no, you get that,
Yeah.
but you're not gonna, you
Yep.
sell it, you're not gonna get any of the profit, that's away. Used to be you did, until that Supreme Court decision.
Maybe you get 125% of your costs because your costs went up.
Well,
We'll have Brian figure out the fees, there we go.
in other foreclosure law, you can hold that money for a certain period, and if it's not claimed within, I think it's a year, then you can take that.
Yes, but that,
But that's not in
Now the
this case.
state has decided they're in charge of that.
yes, so
Okay.
that's
It all
exactly.
started with,
Sorry, I'm getting into Will's realm here.
it all started with some federal lawsuits and
Yeah.
it's progressively got worse.
Okay.
And it's,
The state,
and I agree with you.
the state aggressively cheats everything they
Yeah,
can.
anytime there's a dollar, they
That's why
suck
we
it
have
up as fast as they can.
Till they decided.
Counties can't be trusted with foreclosure surplus. Okay, so, any thoughts on, as we get closer to kind of kicking off actual fiscal year 27 planning, does the budget committee want to have another meeting, have further engagement?
Question about that. So obviously enjoyed the mid-year review last year. But do you feel that you may have enough information gathered on these options on maybe a high level of cost savings or dollars we may recapture, so we can have a second conversation about if we need a levy for funding, what that dollar amount would be based on what that gap is at that point?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I think, so if I understand, based on the options we discussed today, the ones that seem viable, I think you put some numbers on those in terms of
Savings.
What savings and potential revenue. What do we need for a levy to fill some of those gaps? And I think I've done quite a bit just in the background trying to figure out what some of these options might mean, not precise numbers at all, but I think if I can get some support from finance, I think we can get that together pretty quick in terms of putting those numbers together. And I know all these, so I shouldn't have said it.
They love to help you, Will.
But yeah, no, I think we could do that. Would you like to get back together to kind of do that.
Well, maybe my suggestion that we may fit it into the mid-year review cycle. So it's not maybe an additional meeting, but we can just tie it together instead of having a separate meeting.
Do we have that, is that a January thing?
In January.
If indeed you go the levy route, you're gonna have to start doing some pretty heavy planning come January.
Well, I think there's on the county, yeah, I think we'll probably want to start doing some kind of public.
Sheriff Gottney has his hand raised.
Must be present to win.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that levy's gonna help our current situation that rapidly. It's going to be like,
Not gonna help, yeah.
yeah.
Sheriff Gottney, you gotta unmute yourself. There you
Okay,
go.
you hear me?
Yeah.
Do you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Sorry, my little mute button went away for a minute. Hey, I wanted to say I apologize for not being there in person, and I appreciate your whole afternoon of putting this together. Are you there?
Yep. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I heard something else. So anyway, I appreciate all the work that Will has put into this, and I like seeing the options. It seems like we're making some steps forward. I did want to address a couple of things, though. I know a lot of this conversation has been directed towards how to keep the sheriff's office sustainable. But I wanted to point out one thing is that I don't believe that this is just a sheriff's office issue. This is a county issue. The sheriff's office is totally funded through the county. And in the last year, or this year, I guess, you as a county budget board approved $132.2 million for the county budget. Out of that, 16 million and 16.7 million that was for public safety. That's only like 31% of the whole budget. So we are a portion of the entire county. It's not that we are completely separate. And the public safety is the responsibility of the county, and you do that through the sheriff's office. But I can only provide the services that I have funding for. And so I know Commissioner Hermert brought up a bit ago that the county has 13,000 people in it. The city has 14,000, but the sheriff's office serves all 27,000 of those people. We have to serve our civil service in the city. We provide concealed handgun licenses for members who live in the city. There's a number of services that we provide for people who reside inside the city limits of Prineville, not just outside the city limits. So when you're talking about our service population, that is the 27,000. And when we're talking about tourism and bringing in more people to the fairgrounds and more people through the Chamber of Commerce for tourism in our community, that increases that population even higher. And that still becomes part of our responsibility. And so we've got to maintain some form of stability for the sheriff's office into the future. And we can't provide that until we have a plan in place to move forward, so we can actively start working towards putting that plan in place. And that's not going to happen probably for 2 years down the road. We started talking about this 2 years ago, and now we're to the point that we need to start putting some of these plans in action rather than just continuing coming up with meetings and talking about it. We've got to figure out how to move it forward, not only for the sheriff's office, but for the county in general. I know I just saw earlier on that the general fund is also going into the deficit in the future years coming up. So we need to look at the whole operation for the entire county. But we also got to understand that the infrastructure in the county is a large portion that belongs to public safety. And you're not going to attract tourism if you don't have public safety there to protect them. And so I just wanted to, say that I think that the time for action is now. We can't keep putting this off, because it's at least, even if we go down the road for a levy, we're talking 2 years out. And I have my own thoughts about that, but that's for another day, for another discussion. I know you guys have been here all afternoon. I've listened to what you've had to say, and I appreciate all the work that you put into it, and for listening to what Will has presented. And thank you, Will, for putting that together.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.
Well, could I add one thing to next steps for the budget committee?
Yeah.
Come closer. As you all know, by statute, we have rolling terms. So that means of the 3 citizen members, there's always one whose term expires on December 31. So between right now, we are advertising for applicants for the position. I'll reach out to you guys by email, but the 3 of you will need to meet sometime between now and probably mid to end of November to review applicants and make a recommendation to the board, the process, so that we can make sure the position's filled. Again, so I just wanted to throw that in there. You will hear from me.
Good reminder. Thank you. Well, I appreciate everybody's time. Thank you very much. Your feedback, thoughts are very helpful. And we'll keep hammering away.
I hope that we throw your name back in the pot.
Only one.
It's only one, it's only you, isn't it?
That's only one basis.
In fact, I reminded Steve that he had to get his application, and I think I reminded you twice. I think Scott and Bill are
But then,
okay.
yeah,
I think you're
so we're adjourned. We're gonna keep the chair for another year.
You can't be out of
Only if you want.